I truly believed that Emerald Cocktail was proof of his eternal devotion, until the balcony breeze carried his lethal recipe straight to my ears. I instantly realized this anniversary would not end with a kiss, but with a brutal retaliation he could never fathom. Watch closely as the predator becomes the prey in just 5 fateful seconds. My name is Anita Broadwell. To the outside world, specifically the high-stakes corporate ecosystem of Chicago, I am a 32-year-old senior risk analyst for Ironclad Solutions. My job description is deceptively simple. I look at billion-dollar mergers, hostile takeovers, and fragile international trade agreements, and I find the cracks. I find the lies buried in spreadsheets and the structural weaknesses hidden behind firm handshakes. I am paid an exorbitant salary to be suspicious, to assume that everyone is hiding something, and to predict the worst-case scenario before it actually happens. Yet, as I stood in the center of our sprawling penthouse living room, looking out at the glittering skyline of the city that felt like a sea of electric stars, I tried to turn that part of my brain off. Tonight was not about risk assessment. Tonight was about celebration. It was our 7th wedding anniversary. 7 years, in the modern age, specifically for a couple in our tax bracket. 7 years was an eternity. It was a milestone that demanded reverence. The apartment was dim, lit only by the flickering warmth of 24 beeswax candles that Jason had arranged with a geometric precision that was unlike him. Soft jazz played from the hidden speakers, a saxophone melody that curled through the air like smoke. It was perfect. It was the kind of scene one would find in a lifestyle magazine feature about couples who had it all. I smoothed the silk of my dress, taking a deep breath, trying to force my heart rate to match the languid tempo of the music. "Almost ready, darling." Jason's voice drifted from the kitchen. I walked toward the kitchen island, leaning against the cold marble countertop. Jason was there, wearing an apron over his dress shirt, his sleeves rolled up to reveal his forearms. He was 35 years old, and despite a string of failed business ventures that would have crushed a lesser man, he still possessed that golden boyish charm that had captivated me nearly a decade ago. He was handsome in a way that felt effortless, with hair that fell perfectly across his forehead and a smile that could sell sand in a desert. But tonight, he was not smiling, not really. He was focused on a slab of prime beef, searing it in a cast-iron skillet. The smell of rosemary and garlic was intoxicating, yet my eyes did not linger on the food. They lingered on him. It was rare for Jason to cook, in our 7 years together. I could count the number of times he had prepared a full meal on one hand. He usually preferred making reservations at the newest Michelin-starred restaurants, using my credit card to pay for experiences he claimed were necessary for his networking. Tonight, however, he insisted on staying in. He insisted on making everything from scratch. "You look tense," I said softly, watching the way his hand gripped the handle of the skillet. His knuckles were white. Jason flinched, a microscopic jerk on his shoulders, before he turned to me with a wide, plastered-on grin. "Just want it to be perfect. Anita, 7 years, the copper anniversary, right? Or is it wool? I can never remember." "Copper," I corrected him. "Wool is year 7. Copper is... Actually, I think copper is year 7 too, depending on which tradition you follow." He laughed, but the sound was brittle. It did not reach his eyes. "Well, let us stick with copper. It sounds more conductive, more electric." He turned back to the counter where 2 crystal coupe glasses waited. "I made us something special, a signature cocktail. I am calling it Emerald Love." I stepped closer, my professional instincts twitching involuntarily. I observed him with the same detached scrutiny I applied to a suspicious ledger at Ironclad Solutions. Jason was sweating. It was a cool evening. The climate control in the penthouse was set to a perfect 70 degrees, yet there was a distinct sheen of perspiration on his temples. A single bead of sweat tracked down the side of his neck, disappearing into his collar. His jaw muscles were tight, clenching and unclenching in a rhythmic spasm that suggested he was grinding his teeth. "Emerald Love," I asked, keeping my voice light. "What is in it?" "A little bit of everything," he said, his voice dropping an octave, trying for seduction but landing somewhere near desperate. Gin, elderflower, a touch of absinthe for the color, and a secret ingredient I picked up from a mixologist friend. He poured the liquid from the shaker. It was a vibrant, almost radioactive green. It shimmered under the kitchen recessed lighting. It was beautiful, but there was something about the viscosity of it, the way it swirled in the glass, that made the hair on the back of my arms stand up. "Here," he said, sliding one glass toward me, but then he pulled it back immediately. "Wait, it needs ice, the crushed kind, and the garnish." I left the special mint sprigs on the balcony to keep them crisp in the cool air. "I can get them," I offered, making a move to walk around the island. "No," Jason snapped. The word came out like a gunshot, loud and sharp. I stopped, freezing in place. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating the jazz music in the background. Jason blinked, his face flushing red. He cleared his throat, trying to recover his composure. "No, darling. You are the queen tonight. You do not lift a finger. I will go. I need to check the temperature of the wine chilling out there anyway. Just stay here. Relax. Look at the view." He grabbed both glasses of the Emerald Love cocktail. Then, with a movement so fluid he probably thought I missed it, he swiped his smartphone off the counter and shoved it into his pocket. "I will be right back," he said, forcing a wink. 5 minutes. Do not start the party without me." He walked toward the sliding glass doors that led to the expansive terrace. I watched him go. I watched the stiffness in his gait. He walked like a man carrying a heavy load. Not a man carrying 2 cocktails. When the glass door clicked shut behind him, I stood alone in the kitchen. The smell of the searing steak suddenly felt cloying, overwhelming. My heart was hammering against my ribs. "You are being paranoid." "Anita," I told myself, "he is just nervous. He wants to impress you because he feels insecure about his latest bankruptcy. He is trying..." But the risk analyst in me was screaming. The data points did not align. The sweat, the clenched jaw, the aggressive refusal to let me help. The way he took his phone just to go 10 feet away to the balcony. Why take the phone? Who calls during an anniversary dinner? I looked at the empty spot on the counter where the glasses had been. A feeling of dread, cold and viscous like oil, began to pool in my stomach. I could not ignore it. At Ironclad Solutions, ignoring a gut feeling was the first step toward a catastrophe. I slipped off my heels so I could move silently across the hardwood floor. I did not want him to hear my approach. I told myself I was just going to surprise him. Maybe I would sneak up behind him, wrap my arms around his waist, and apologize for being so stiff. Maybe I would kiss the tension out of his shoulders. I reached the heavy velvet drapes that covered the wall of windows. The sliding door was slightly ajar. Jason had not latched it completely. Likely to get back inside quickly with full hands, a sliver of cold night air drifted in, carrying the sounds of the city traffic far below. I moved to step into the opening, to announce my presence, but then I saw him. Jason was not garnishing drinks. He had set the 2 glasses down on the outdoor table. He was standing by the railing, his back to me, hunched over his phone. The wind whipped his shirt, but he did not seem to notice the chill. He was gripping the device with white-knuckled intensity. I paused, hidden in the shadows of the heavy fabric. The light from the living room did not reach him there. He was in the dark. Then, he spoke. It was not the loving, charming voice he had used in the kitchen. It was a hushed, urgent whisper, but the wind carried it directly through the crack in the door, straight to my ears. "I told you to wait," Jason hissed into the phone. "I am doing it right now." My breath hitched. I pressed a hand over my mouth, my body turning into a statue. Who was he talking to? He paused, listening to the person on the other end. Then he nodded, a jerky, nervous motion. "Do not worry," Jason said, his voice trembling slightly, not with fear, but with a terrifying excitement. "I put enough aconitine in it. I used the whole vial just to be sure. It is masked by the absinthe. She will not taste a thing." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The floor beneath my feet felt like it had dissolved into nothingness. Aconitine, wolfsbane, the queen of poisons. I knew what it was. I had researched toxicological risks for a biotech merger 3 years ago. It caused cardiac arrhythmia. It was fast. It was brutal. Jason continued, his voice dropping lower, dripping with malice. It will look exactly like acute heart failure. The doctors will not even look for a toxin unless they have a reason to. And they will not. She is stressed. She works 80 hours a week. It is the perfect cover. He laughed then, a low, short sound that made my blood run cold. It was the sound of a stranger. I did not know this man. I had slept beside him for 2,555 nights, and I did not know him at all. Yes, Valerie, he whispered. Valerie. The name hung in the air like a blade. Valerie was the pharmacist at the private hospital where Jason had gone for his checkups. I had met her once at a charity gala. She was petite, blonde, with eyes that looked innocent. "Tonight," Jason promised her, staring at the Chicago skyline as if he already owned it. "Tonight the bitch dies, and the $10 million in life insurance will be ours by morning. Just have the champagne ready." He hung up the phone. I stood there, behind the curtain, and I felt something inside me shatter. It was the part of me that believed in love, in partnership, in the vows we had exchanged before 300 witnesses. It shattered into a million jagged pieces. My husband, the man I had supported through every failure, the man whose debts I had quietly paid off, the man I had built a life with, was not just cheating on me. He was actively, right this second, executing a plan to murder me. He was going to kill me for $10 million. The sheer banality of the motive was almost insulting. 10 million. That was the price of my life to him. Panic flared in my chest, hot and blinding. I needed to run. I needed to scream. I needed to burst through that door and confront him, to claw his eyes out, to call the police. But then, the training kicked in. Years of high-pressure risk analysis washed over me like a bucket of ice water. Panic is a variable. My mentor used to say, "Panic leads to error. Analysis leads to a solution." If I ran now, he would catch me. He was physically stronger. We were on a penthouse balcony, 40 stories up. If I confronted him, he could just throw me over the railing and claim I jumped, or he could force the drink down my throat. If I called the police, it would be his word against mine until they found the poison, and by then, he might have disposed of it. No. I watched him through the crack in the curtains. He was pocketing his phone. He was picking up the glasses. He was adjusting his cuffs, composing his face back into the mask of the loving husband. He was preparing to walk back into this room and hand me my death sentence with a smile. He thought he was the predator. He thought I was the oblivious prey, the tired corporate wife who would drink whatever he gave her. I stepped back from the curtain, my movements silent and precise. I retreated to the sofa, my mind racing at a speed that would have terrified him if he could hear it. The betrayal was a physical pain, a knife twisting in my gut, but the pain would have to wait. Grief was a luxury for the living, and if I wanted to stay among the living, I had to act. He wanted a tragedy tonight. Fine, I would give him one, but it would not be the one he wrote. I sat down on the plush velvet sofa. Crossing my legs, I picked up a magazine from the coffee table, opening it to a random page. I forced my breathing to slow. I forced the tremors in my hands to cease. I waited for the sound of the sliding door opening. I waited for my husband to come back inside. "Everything is ready," I whispered to myself, my voice barely audible even to me. The door handle turned. Jason stepped in, carrying the 2 emerald green glasses. He was smiling. "Sorry for the wait, darling," he said. I looked up at him, and I smiled back. It was the best performance of my life. "It is quite all right, Jason," I said. "I was just thinking about how lucky we are." The game had begun, and unlike him, I never entered a game I did not intend to win. Jason paused at the glass threshold, taking a moment to compose himself. I could see his silhouette through the sheer inner curtains, a shadow puppet in a play that had suddenly turned grotesque. He rolled his shoulders back, loosening the tension in his trapezius muscles, and smoothed the front of his crisp white dress shirt. It was a grooming gesture, like a predator shaking off the dust before pouncing. He adjusted his grip on the two crystal glasses, ensuring the condensation did not make them slip. He took a deep breath, inhaling the cool night air one last time as a free man, though he did not know it yet, and plastered that dazzling, rehearsed smile back onto his face. I threw myself onto the sofa. The movement had to be fluid, casual, devoid of the frantic terror that was currently flooding my veins with cortisol. I grabbed the magazine I had discarded earlier, opening it blindly. My eyes scanned the page, but my brain registered nothing. The letters were just black ants marching across a white field. I was listening. I was listening with every nerve ending in my body. The sliding door hissed open. "Here we are," Jason announced. His voice was bright, too bright, brittle like spun sugar. I did not look up immediately. That would have been too eager. I counted to 3, 1, 2, 3, and then lifted my gaze. I kept my expression soft, questioning the perfect picture of a wife waiting for a treat. "They look beautiful," I said. My voice did not shake. I mentally thanked the thousands of boardroom presentations I had delivered under extreme pressure. This was just another presentation. The stakeholder was hostile, and the stakes were absolute. Jason walked toward the low coffee table that sat between us. It was a slab of polished obsidian, dark and reflective. He moved with a deliberate slowness, placing the first glass down in front of my seat. "For the most beautiful woman in Chicago," he said. Then, he placed the second glass on his side of the table. I watched his hands. I watched them with the intensity of a hawk spotting a field mouse. The glasses were identical, heavy crystal coupes, etched with delicate floral patterns near the rim. The liquid inside was a vibrant, toxic emerald green, frothing slightly at the top. There was no difference in the garnish. Both had a sprig of mint and a twist of lime. But I knew. I knew because I had watched him pour them in my mind's eye 1,000 times in the last 30 seconds. I knew because his hand had lingered just a fraction of a second longer on the glass he placed in front of me. It was a subconscious tell. He was making sure the weapon was aimed correctly. "Thank you, darling," I said, reaching for the glass. "Wait," Jason said, patting his pockets. He frowned, a theatrical knitting of his brows that deserved a Razzie Award. "My phone. I think I left it on the balcony railing when I was getting the mint." My heart slammed against my ribs. This was it. This was the variable I had calculated, the only variable that gave me a probability of survival greater than 0. He needed his phone. He was an addict to it. And more importantly, he would want to check his messages from Valerie. He would want to give her the signal that the deed was done. "Go get it," I said, casually flipping a page of the magazine. "I am not going anywhere." "I will be right back," he said. "Do not drink without me. It is bad luck." He turned. The moment his back was to me, the world narrowed down to a single, razor-sharp tunnel of focus. Time did not just slow down, it fractured. I could hear the fabric of his trousers rustling as he walked away. I could hear the distant wail of a siren 40 floors down. I could hear the blood rushing in my ears like a roaring waterfall. I had 5 seconds, maybe 6, if he fumbled for the device. 1. I dropped the magazine. It hit the rug with a muffled thump that sounded like a gunshot to my heightened senses. I did not stand up. Standing would take too long to sit back down. Instead, I leaned forward, engaging my core, sliding my body to the edge of the plush cushion. 2. My hands shot out. They did not tremble. Fear was a chemical, but precision was a choice. I reached for both glasses simultaneously. My left hand grasped the stem of his glass, the safe glass. My right hand grasped the stem of my glass, the vessel of death. The crystal was cold and wet against my fingertips. 3. Jason was at the door. He was stepping over the threshold. He was not looking back. I lifted them. I did not lift them high, just an inch off the obsidian surface to avoid the sound of glass dragging on stone. I crossed my arms in the air, a swift, decisive scissor motion. The green liquid inside sloshed dangerously near the rims. If I spilled a single drop, the game was over. If the liquid levels became uneven, he might notice. I held my breath, my lungs burning. The liquid settled. Not a drop was lost. 4. I placed the glass that had been in front of me onto his coaster. I placed the glass that had been in front of him onto my coaster. But that was not enough. I was a risk analyst. I accounted for every detail. The condensation rings. The glass I had moved to his side sat slightly off-center from the wet ring the previous glass had left. If he looked down, he would see 2 overlapping rings. He would know the glass had been moved. I reached out with my index finger and nudged the base of the glass, sliding it 2 millimeters to the left until it sat perfectly inside the original ring of water. I rotated the stem slightly so the mint sprig faced the exact same angle as before. 5. Found it, Jason called out from the balcony. I threw myself back against the sofa cushions. I grabbed the magazine and snapped it up in front of my face. My heart was beating so hard, I thought he would see my chest heaving through the silk of my dress. I forced myself to exhale slowly through my nose, regulating the oxygen, commanding my autonomic nervous system to stand down. You are safe. The swap is done. The risk has been transferred. Jason walked back into the room. He was holding his phone, looking relieved. He tucked it into his pocket and clapped his hands together, rubbing them as if he were preparing to carve a turkey. Crisis averted, he said, beaming at me. I would hate to miss a call from work, even tonight. Work never stops, I agreed. My voice sounded deeper, huskier. I cleared my throat. Not even for us. He sat down opposite me. He looked at the table. I held my breath again. I watched his eyes. He looked at the glass in front of him, the glass that was, until 3 seconds ago, sitting in front of me. He looked at the condensation ring. He smiled. He did not see it. He saw what he wanted to see. He saw a dead wife and a $10 million payout. He saw a future with Valerie and a new sports car. He was blinded by his own arrogance. He reached out and wrapped his fingers around the stem of the glass. The image was seared into my retinas, his manicured hand, the gold wedding band on his finger, a ring I had paid for clutching the instrument of his own destruction. It was poetic. It was horrifying. Shall we? He asked, lifting the glass. I reached for mine, the glass he had poured for himself, the safe glass. We shall, I replied. We raised the glasses into the space between us. The green liquid caught the candlelight, glowing like kryptonite. To 7 years, Jason said, his eyes locking onto mine. There was a glimmer of excitement in them that made my stomach turn. He was watching me with a morbid anticipation. He wanted to see the moment the light went out in my eyes. He wanted to watch me die. And to the future, may it bring us everything we deserve. Everything we deserve. The irony was so thick I could taste it, bitter and metallic. To the future, I echoed. I leaned forward, clinking my glass against his. The sound was a clear, sharp chime that resonated in the silent apartment. And to eternal loyalty. Jason, because without loyalty we are nothing. His smile faltered for a fraction of a second. A shadow passed over his face, a flicker of doubt. It was just confusion. He did not think I was capable of suspecting him. He thought I was the fool who paid the bills while he played the big shot. To loyalty, he agreed, recovering quickly. He brought the glass to his lips. I did the same. I watched him over the rim of my glass. He did not sip. He was eager. He wanted to get it over with. He tilted his head back and swallowed a large mouthful of the emerald love. I saw his throat work. I saw the muscles contract as the aconitine slid down his esophagus, entering his system, rushing toward his bloodstream. I tilted my glass, letting the cool liquid touch my lips. I took a sip, but I did not swallow. I let the liquid pool under my tongue, holding it there, tasting the elderflower and the gin. It was sweet, cloying. Jason lowered his glass. It was empty. He had drained it. Delicious, he exhaled, setting the empty glass down on the table with a satisfied click. Really unique flavor. Do you like it? I lowered my glass, keeping my lips pressed tight together. I nodded enthusiastically, eyes widening in mock delight. I reached for the linen napkin on the table, bringing it to my mouth as if to dab away a stray drop. Into the folds of the thick white fabric, I spat the mouthful of liquid. I folded the napkin casually in my hand, hiding the wet stain, and placed it on my lap. "It is incredible, Jason," I said, finally allowing myself to swallow the saliva in my empty mouth. "I have never tasted anything like it. It takes my breath away." "I knew you would like it," he said. He leaned back in his chair, crossing his legs. He looked comfortable. He looked like a king on his throne. But then, he did something that chilled me to the bone. He glanced at his watch. It was a reflex, a quick, subtle check of the time. He was starting the countdown. He was calculating how long it would take for the aconitine to metabolize. 5 minutes 10. He was probably wondering if he had time to finish his steak before I started convulsing on the floor. "Are you hungry?" he asked, gesturing to the kitchen. "I should check on the meat. It should be resting by now." "I am famished," I said. "But stay here for a moment. Just talk to me. We have not really talked in so long." I wanted him here. I wanted to look him in the eye when it happened. I did not want him dying in the kitchen where he could potentially grab a knife or make a scene. I wanted him right here, in the center of the trap he had built. "Of course," Jason said, checking his watch again. "We have plenty of time." He smiled at me, a predator's smile, full of teeth and false warmth. "Tell me, Anita," he said softly. "How are you feeling? You look a little flushed." He was looking for the symptoms. He was looking for the arrhythmia, the shortness of breath, the panic. "I feel fine," I lied, leaning back and crossing my legs to mirror his posture. "Actually, I feel better than I have in years. I feel awake." Jason nodded, but I saw the confusion tightening the corners of his eyes. It was too soon, he told himself. The poison needed time. He tapped his fingers on the armrest of the chair. Tap, 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 the rhythm of a ticking clock. I sat there, the linen napkin damp in my hand, and I waited. I watched the man I had married, the man who had just tried to murder me, and I felt a strange, cold void where my heart used to be. The Anita who had cried over his failed startups, the Anita who had believed in his potential. She was gone. She had died the moment he whispered into the phone on the balcony. The woman sitting here now was someone else, someone colder, someone who could watch a man die and feel nothing but the grim satisfaction of a balanced equation. The countdown had begun, but the clock was not ticking for me. "You know," Jason said, his voice taking on a casual, conversational tone that masked his scrutiny. "I was thinking about where we should go for our next trip. Maybe Italy. We haven't been to the Amalfi Coast since our honeymoon." He was planning the future. In the future, he thought he would spend my life insurance money with Valerie. "Italy sounds lovely," I said, "but the cliffs are dangerous. Jason, one slip and you are gone." He laughed. "I will be careful. I am always careful." "Are you?" I asked. I let a tiny sliver of steel enter my voice, just enough to make him blink. "Of course," he said, frowning slightly. He rubbed his chest absent-mindedly. My eyes snapped to the movement. His hand was massaging his sternum. It was starting. "Is something wrong?" I asked, feigning concern. "No," he said quickly, dropping his hand. "Just a little heartburn. Probably the spices in the steak rub. I tasted it earlier." "Maybe you should drink some water," I suggested. "Or maybe another cocktail." "No," he said, and his voice was a little breathier than before. "I am fine. Just give me a second." He checked his watch for the third time. Tick, tock. I looked at the empty glass in front of him. The green residue at the bottom was settling. It was a beautiful color. Emerald. The color of envy. The color of greed. "Happy anniversary, Jason," I whispered. He looked up at me, startled by the sudden sentiment. "Happy anniversary, darling." He did not know it was the last thing he would ever celebrate. He did not know that the fire spreading in his chest was not heartburn, but the beginning of the end. He sat there, arrogant and doomed, while I watched him with the cold, calculating eyes of a judge who had already passed the sentence. The 5 seconds of destiny had passed. Now, we were just waiting for the executioner to arrive. The clock on the mantelpiece ticked with an agonizing slowness. 20 minutes had passed since Jason had drained his glass. 20 minutes of him watching me, waiting for the inevitable collapse. He was expecting me to clutch my chest. He was expecting the light to fade from my eyes. But I remained frustratingly, stubbornly alive. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, twirling a strand of hair around my finger, humming a soft melody. I could feel his gaze burning into my back. It was a mixture of confusion and growing panic. He was checking his watch every 30 seconds now. The math was not adding up for him, by his calculations. Based on the dosage he had bragged about to his mistress, I should have been on the floor by now. "Do you remember that little cafe in Florence?" I asked, turning to face him. I kept my voice light, bubbly, utterly oblivious to the murder plot unfolding in the room. The one where we got lost in the rain. "You were so gallant that day. Jason, you gave me your jacket even though you were shivering." Jason shifted in his chair. He rubbed his lips with the back of his hand. It was a small movement, but I caught it. The numbness was starting. Aconitine begins with a tingling sensation in the mouth and tongue, a prickling heat that spreads like wildfire. He probably thought it was just the alcohol, or perhaps the adrenaline of the kill. "I remember," he croaked. His voice sounded thick. He cleared his throat aggressively. "Anita, are you sure you are feeling all right? You seem hyperactive." "I am just happy," I said, walking over to the sidebar to pour myself a glass of water. "I feel energized. Maybe it is the emerald cocktail. It really has a kick. Doesn't it?" He stared at me, his eyes slightly too wide. He rubbed his chest again. The arrhythmia was beginning. His heart was starting to skip beats, fluttering like a trapped bird against his ribcage. "Yeah," he muttered. "A kick." He tried to stand up. It was a simple action, one he had performed millions of times in his life, but this time, his legs did not obey him. He stumbled, his knee buckling underneath him, and he had to grab the edge of the obsidian coffee table to keep from face-planting into the rug. "Whoa there," I said, rushing over but stopping just out of arm's reach. "Careful, darling. You look a little unsteady. Did you drink too fast?" "I am fine," he snapped, but the words were slurred. The numbness was spreading to his face muscles. He looked terrified. He knew something was wrong, but his arrogance would not let him accept the truth. He thought his body was betraying him, failing him at the crucial moment. He did not suspect the swap, not yet. He sat back down heavily, gasping for air. I need some water. My chest feels tight." "Oh no," I said, placing a hand over my mouth in mock horror. "Is it the stress you have been working so hard on those failed startups? Jason, it takes a toll." "Shut up," he wheezed. "Just get me water." I did not move. I stood there, looking down at him, my expression shifting from concern to a cool, detached curiosity. I was analyzing the breakdown of a system. The input was poison. The output was catastrophic failure. "You know," I continued, ignoring his plea, "I was looking through our wedding album yesterday. We looked so innocent. I promised to love you in sickness and in health. I really meant that. Jason, did you—" He was not listening to me. He was clawing at his collar, ripping the top button of his shirt open. He was sweating profusely now, cold, clammy sweat that beaded on his graying skin. His breath was coming in short, ragged gasps. The paralysis was creeping down his limbs. He tried to lift his hand to check his watch again, but his arm flopped uselessly onto the armrest. "Anita," he gasped. Call 911. Something is wrong." "Is it?" I asked. I took a step closer. "What does it feel like? Describe it to me." He looked at me with wild, bloodshot eyes. "My heart. It is beating too fast. I can't feel my legs. Help me." He slid out of the chair. It was a slow, pathetic descent. He slumped onto the expensive Persian rug, his body convulsing slightly. He looked like a fish thrown onto the deck of a boat, gasping for oxygen that his lungs could no longer process efficiently. He turned his head, his eyes locking onto his smartphone which lay on the table. It was only 3 feet away. The lifeline to the world, the lifeline to an ambulance. He tried to crawl toward it. He dug his fingers into the rug, dragging his heavy body forward inch by inch, but the neurotoxin was faster. His muscles seized. He collapsed onto his side, his face pressed against the floor. Staring at the phone he could not reach. I walked around the table and stood directly in his line of sight. I loomed over him, blocking out the light from the chandelier. I knelt down. I moved with the grace of a predator who has already won the hunt and is simply taking its time with the meal. I brought my face close to his, so close that I could smell the faint scent of the elderflower from the cocktail on his breath. "Jason," I whispered. My voice was low, intimate, stripped of all warmth. It was the voice of the void. He rolled his eyes up to look at me. There was confusion there, and pain. "Does it hurt?" I asked softly. He tried to speak, but only a gurgle came out. "It looks painful," I observed clinically. "The tingling, the numbness, the feeling that your heart is exploding, it must be terrifying." I leaned closer, my lips brushing his ear. "Does the feeling of your heart stopping resemble exactly what you described to her?" "Jason." The effect was instantaneous. His eyes snapped wide open, bulging in their sockets. The realization hit him harder than the poison. The physical pain was nothing compared to the sudden, violent psychological crash. He knew. In that split second, the entire evening replayed in his mind. The balcony, the phone call, the moment I went to get the magazine. For 5 seconds he turned his back. He realized he was not the hunter. He was the prey. He realized that the woman he thought was a foolish, loving sheep was actually a wolf who had been waiting in the tall grass. He tried to scream. He opened his mouth, his jaw working furiously, but the paralysis had taken his vocal cords. All that came out was a high-pitched, keeling whine. It was the sound of a man who realized he had dug his own grave and jumped into it. You, he mouthed, the words forming shapelessly on his numb lips. "Me," I confirmed. "I heard you." "Jason, I heard every word. Tonight the bitch dies. That is what you said, isn't it?" I reached out and gently stroked his damp hair, a gesture of mockery that made him flinch. "But I am not the one dying tonight. You are." Tears of rage and terror leaked from the corners of his eyes. He tried to lunge at me, to bite me, to do anything to hurt me, but he was a statue made of flesh. He was trapped in his own dying body, forced to listen to his executioner. "Do not worry," I said, standing up and smoothing my skirt. "I am not a monster. I will call for help, eventually." I turned my back on him. I walked over to the landline phone on the kitchen counter. I took a deep breath. I closed my eyes and summoned the persona I needed. I thought about the betrayal, the lies, the $10 million. I let the adrenaline spike. When I picked up the receiver and dialed 911, I was no longer the cold avenger. I was the hysterical, terrified wife. 911, what is your emergency?" The operator's voice crackled. "Help me, please," I screamed into the phone, my voice cracking perfectly. "It is my husband. I think he is having a stroke or a heart attack. Oh my God, he is on the floor." "Ma'am, I need you to calm down. What is the address?" "The penthouse, 450 North Lake Shore Drive. Please hurry. He is turning blue. He can't breathe." "Paramedics are on the way." "Ma'am, is he conscious?" "Barely. He was just drinking a cocktail, and then he collapsed. He has a history of high blood pressure. Please, hurry." I hung up the phone. The performance was flawless. I had planted the seed. Stroke, heart attack, high blood pressure. I had directed the narrative away from poison before the paramedics even arrived. I looked back at Jason. He was still conscious. He had heard every word. He knew exactly what I was doing. I was constructing his obituary, and he was powerless to edit it. But I was not done. I had about 7 to 10 minutes before the ambulance arrived. That was plenty of time for a woman of my efficiency. I walked past his convulsing body, stepping over his outstretched hand as if it were a piece of trash. I went straight to his briefcase, which was sitting on the hallway console table. I knew he had the papers. He was arrogant enough to keep them close, wanting to file the claim the moment the coroner signed the death certificate. I flipped the latches, locked. I looked at Jason. "The code, darling?" I asked sweet. "Oh, never mind. It is probably your birthday. You are that predictable." I spun the dials. 0, 5, 1, 2, click. The briefcase popped open, and there they were, a thick manila envelope. I pulled it out. The header was bold and unmistakable: Sterling Life Insurance Policy, term life, benefit amount, $10 million. The beneficiary was listed clearly: Jason Broadwell. The date of the policy effect was only 3 weeks ago. "You really bet big, didn't you?" I said, holding the papers up so he could see them from his vantage point on the floor. I pulled out my own smartphone. I opened the camera app. I took clear, high-resolution photos of every page: the policy number, the signature, the beneficiary designation, the date. I photographed the clause about accidental death. I photographed it all. This was my insurance. This was the motive. If he survived, which was unlikely, but I dealt with risk management, so I prepared for all outcomes. I had proof that he had a $10 million reason to want me dead. If he died, this was the evidence that would help frame the narrative I needed for the police. I shoved the papers back into the envelope and returned it to the briefcase, locking it exactly as it had been. I walked back to Jason. His skin was now a terrifying shade of gray. His breathing was shallow and erratic. His eyes were glazing over, but he was still looking at me. The hatred in them was dimming, replaced by a pure, animalistic fear of death. "The ambulance is coming. Jason," I said, kneeling down beside him one last time. I took his cold, limp hand in mine. "But you and I both know that aconitine is fast. By the time they get up here, by the time they figure out it is not a heart attack, well..." I checked my own watch. "It has been 25 minutes. You are in the final stage." I squeezed his hand, not in comfort, but in a final act of dominance. "Save your energy," I whispered. "You are going to need it to explain to the devil why you tried to kill the only person who ever actually loved you." Sirens wailed in the distance, getting louder. They were coming for him, but they were too late to save him, and they were far too late to save the man he used to be. The Jason I loved was dead. The thing on the floor was just a broken calculation, a risk that had been neutralized. I stood up, messed up my hair to look frantic, and ran to the door to unlock it for the paramedics. The show was about to enter its second act, and I had to be ready for my close-up. The fluorescent lights of the emergency room at Northwestern Memorial Hospital were blinding. A stark, sterile white that washed out all color and left only the gray pallor of trauma. The air smelled of isopropyl alcohol, latex, and the metallic tang of dried blood. I sat in the waiting area, a private alcove reserved for families of high-profile patients. Clutching a styrofoam cup of lukewarm coffee, I had no intention of drinking. My performance as the grieving, terrified wife continued unabated. I had allowed the nurses to drape a shock blanket over my shoulders. I had allowed my mascara to run just enough to suggest uncontrollable weeping, while keeping my eyes clear enough to observe everything. Through the glass partitions of the trauma bay, I could see the team working on Jason. It was a chaotic ballet. They had intubated him in the ambulance when his respiratory drive began to fail. Now, he was hooked up to a forest of monitors, wires snake-charming their way out of his gown. A doctor, a tall man with graying temples and a badge that read, "Dr. Evans, Chief of Toxicology," stepped out of the bay and walked toward me. He looked perplexed. He pulled off his gloves, snapping the latex with a frown. "Mrs. Broadwell," he asked gently. I stood up, letting the blanket slip slightly. Is Jason alive? He is stable for the moment, Doctor, Evans said, but his tone was hesitant. However, I have to be honest with you. This does not look like a standard stroke or a myocardial infarction. The EKG readings are chaotic, showing bidirectional ventricular tachycardia, and the neurological symptoms, the paresthesia, the paralysis, it presents much more like a neurotoxic event. He paused, studying my face. Has your husband been exposed to any chemicals recently? Pesticides, herbal supplements, anything unusual? This was the pivot point. If I played innocent, they would keep digging until they found the aconitine, and then the police investigation would turn toward the person who made the drink. Me. I needed to steer the narrative immediately. I looked down, twisting my wedding ring, the ring Jason had bought with money he likely borrowed from a shark. Doctor, I whispered, my voice trembling. I did not want to say this to the 911 operator because I was scared. Scared of what, Doctor? Evans asked, stepping closer. Jason has been in trouble, I lied, letting a tear slip down my cheek. Financial trouble. He owes money to some very bad people, loan sharks. They have been threatening him. Last week, we found a dead rat on our doorstep. Tonight, he insisted on checking the wine and the ice on the balcony before we drank because he was paranoid that someone might have tampered with them. I looked up at the doctor, widening my eyes. He drank that cocktail and collapsed. Do you think someone got into the penthouse? Do you think they poisoned him? Doctor. Evans's expression shifted from medical curiosity to grim realization. The gang/debt narrative provided a logical container for the symptoms. It explained the poison without implicating the wife. In fact, it made the wife a secondary target, a victim to be protected. I see. Doctor, Evans said gravely, I need to order a specific toxicology screen immediately, and Mrs. Broadwell, we will need to notify the police. If this is an attempted homicide by a third party, you might be in danger too. Please, I sobbed, burying my face in my hands. Just save him. 3 hours later, Jason was moved to the intensive care unit on the 12th floor. The room was dim, lit only by the green and amber glow of the life support machines. The rhythmic beeping of the cardiac monitor was the only sound. A steady, electronic metronome counting out the seconds of his miserable life. He was conscious now, the sedative wearing off, but he was still weak. The tube had been removed from his throat, replaced by an oxygen mask that fogged up with every ragged breath. I waited until the nurse checked his vitals and left the room. He needs rest, she had whispered. Don't agitate him. I will just sit by his side and pray, I replied. As soon as the heavy door clicked shut, the atmosphere in the room shifted. I dropped the grieving widow act instantly. My posture straightened. The tears evaporated. I walked over to the door and locked it. Then, I turned my attention to the ceiling. In the corner, a small dome camera blinked with a slow red light. Hospital security. I dragged a chair over to the corner, stepped up onto it, and took a piece of chewing gum I had been working on for the last hour out of my mouth. I stuck it directly over the lens. It was crude, but effective. Audio might still be recording, but without the visual context, anything could be claimed. Besides, I intended to whisper. I walked to the bedside. Jason's eyes were open. They were tracking me. Fear, raw and unfiltered, radiated from him. He looked small in the hospital bed, his skin the color of old parchment. The handsome, arrogant man who had toasted to my death was gone. In his place lay a broken creature. I leaned over the bed rail, bringing my face inches from his. I pulled his oxygen mask down slightly so he could speak, but not enough to trigger the alarms. "Hello, darling," I said softly. "You," he rasped. His voice was a wreck, scorched by the toxin and the intubation. "You switched." "I did," I interrupted, my voice cool and clinical. "And because I did, you are alive. If I had let you drink the whole glass, or if I hadn't called 911 when I did, you would be in the morgue right now, So, strictly speaking, I saved your life. You tried to kill me, he accused, tears leaking from his eyes. I laughed. It was a low, dry sound. Let us be very clear about the narrative here. Jason, I did not poison a drink. You did. You bought the aconitine. You poured it. You intended it for me. I simply redirected the delivery system. I pulled out my phone and held it up. On the screen was the photo of the life insurance policy I had taken in the apartment. I know about the $10 million. Jason, I hissed. I know about the debt. I know you are drowning. And I know that if the police find out you bought poison to kill your wife for insurance money, you will not just go to prison. You will go to prison as a wife killer. In the hierarchy of inmates, that puts you somewhere near the bottom. They will eat you alive. Jason stared at the screen, his pupils dilating. He tried to shake his head, but he was too weak. However, I continued, swiping the screen to a black void, I am a generous woman. I am willing to offer you a deal. Deal, he choked out. What? What do you want? We need a scapegoat, I said. The doctors already think this was a hit, a warning from loan sharks. But loan sharks are vague. We need a name. We need the person who gave you the poison. Jason squeezed his eyes shut. He knew where this was going. Who gave it to you? Jason? I demanded, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Who taught you how to use aconitine? You are a failed businessman, not a chemist. You didn't come up with this on your own. No, he moaned. Was it Valerie? I asked. His eyes snapped open. I heard you on the phone, I said. I know she's involved. She is the pharmacist, isn't she? She has access to the drugs. She told you the dosage. She will go to jail. Jason whimpered. He was still trying to protect her. It was almost touching, in a pathetic way. Better her than you, I countered ruthlessly. Think about it. Jason, if you don't give them Valerie, they will look at you. They will trace the purchase. Did you use cash? No. You probably used a card linked to a Shell account, but you are sloppy. They will find it. But if you say Valerie gave it to you, if you say she gave it to you to hold for her, or maybe she tampered with the bottle herself, then you are just a victim. I leaned closer, gripping his wrist. Valerie or you, Jason, choose, right now, because the detectives are in the hallway. He looked at me, then at the door, then back at me. I could see the self-preservation instinct overriding whatever lust or affection he felt for his mistress. He was a narcissist. In the end, a narcissist always chooses himself. She got it from the hospital inventory, Jason whispered, a tear sliding into his ear. She brought it to the apartment yesterday. She said it would be untraceable. Good, I said. Now, say it again, but this time, I want you to say that she told you it was a special herbal stimulant for our anniversary. Say you didn't know it was poison. Say she tricked you. Why? Because, I smiled, that makes you innocent of murder. Jason, it makes you a victim of a crazy, jealous mistress who wanted to kill us both to have you all to herself. It fits the facts. You drank it. You almost died. Why would you drink poison if you knew what it was? The only logical explanation is that you were tricked. It was a brilliant twist. It exonerated him of the immediate attempted suicide or murder charge, but it tied him irrevocably to Valerie, and it gave me the weapon I needed to destroy her. I pulled my phone back out and opened the voice recorder app. Repeat after me, I commanded. I, Jason Broadwell, declare that Valerie, what is her last name? Kinsley, he muttered. Valerie Kinsley gave me a vial of liquid yesterday. She told me it was a mood enhancer for my anniversary. She insisted I put it in the drinks. I had no idea it was aconitine. Jason took a rattling breath. He looked at the recorder, then at my steely gaze. He knew he had no choice. Valerie Kinsley gave me the vial, he recited, his voice shaking. She told me. It was for the anniversary. I didn't know. I didn't know it was poison. Perfect, I said, stopping the recording. I saved the file to the cloud immediately. Now, when the police come in, you tell them about the loan sharks first. Keep it vague. Say you have enemies, but when they push for details on the drink, you break down and tell them about Valerie. You tell them you were having an affair, but you tried to end it, and she gave you this gift as a parting peace offering. You are a devil, Jason whispered, looking at me with a mixture of awe and horror. I am a wife who was pushed too far. I corrected him. And remember, Jason, one slip up, and I release the insurance photos. You will die in prison. Do we have an understanding? Yes, he whispered. I unlocked the door, stepped down from the chair, removed the gum from the camera lens, and sat back down in the visitor's chair. I buried my face in my hands again. 30 seconds later, there was a knock at the door. 2 uniformed officers and a man in a cheap suit entered. The man flashed a badge. Detective Miller, Chicago PD, Mrs. Broadwell. Is he awake? I looked up, eyes red-rimmed. He is awake, but he is very weak. Detective Miller approached the bed. Mr. Broadwell, I know you are recovering, but we need to ask you some questions about the events of this evening. The toxicology report shows a high concentration of aconitine in your system. That is not a household substance. Do you know how it got there? Jason looked at the detective. Then his eyes darted to me. I sat frozen, clutching a tissue, looking at him with desperate, loving eyes. It was a silent command. Jason swallowed hard. I think someone is trying to kill me, he croaked. Who? Miller asked, taking out a notepad. I made some bad investments, Jason began, reciting the script. I owe money. People have been calling, threatening. Did these people have access to your home? Maybe, Jason said. But there is something else. He paused, adding a dramatic effect that I hadn't even coached him on. He was a natural liar. After all, there is a woman, Jason said, his voice trembling. Valerie Kinsley. She has been stalking me. She is a pharmacist. Detective Miller's pen stopped moving. He looked up sharply. A pharmacist. She gave me something, Jason cried, the monitor's heart rate picking up speed. She gave me a bottle to put in the drinks. She said it was just to help us relax. Oh God, she tried to kill me. She tried to kill my wife. I let out a gasp and covered my mouth. Jason, what are you talking about? Who is Valerie? I am so sorry, Anita, Jason sobbed, reaching for my hand. I had an affair. It was over, I swear, but she wouldn't let go. Detective Miller looked at his partner. Get an address on Valerie Kinsley, pharmacist, check hospital registries, and get a warrant. I sat there, holding my husband's hand, comforting the man who had tried to murder me less than an hour ago. The police were buying it. The doctors were buying it. Jason was trapped in a lie of his own making, forced to destroy his lover to save his own skin. I squeezed his hand tight. He flinched. I had successfully turned the chessboard. I was no longer the piece being sacrificed. I was the player moving the pawns. And the Black Queen Valerie was about to be taken off the board completely. I stepped out of the intensive care unit into the sterile, hushed corridor. The air was cold, recycled, and smelled of antiseptic and stale coffee. I held my breath for a moment, letting the heavy door click shut behind me, sealing my husband and his lies inside his glass cage. In my hand, I gripped Jason's smartphone. It was warm, vibrating slightly with phantom notifications. I had swiped it from the bedside table while the nurses were adjusting his IV drip. Slipping it into my purse with the sleight of hand of a magician, I knew the passcode. 6 months ago, I had watched him unlock it over his shoulder while he thought I was asleep. 0, 5, 1, 2, the date we bought the penthouse. A sentimental code for a man who lacked all sentiment. I walked briskly toward the elevator, my heels clicking a sharp rhythm on the linoleum. I needed privacy. I found a quiet alcove near the vending machines on the lower level. I unlocked the phone. The background was a photo of his new Porsche, not me, typical. I navigated straight to his messages. There it was, a thread pinned to the top. The contact name was listed simply as V. I opened it. The history was a nauseating scroll of heart emojis, illicit rendezvous plans, and mockery of me. "She is so boring," he had written 2 days ago. "I cannot wait until we are free." I felt a surge of bile rise in my throat, but I swallowed it down. Disgust was a useless emotion right now. I needed a strategy. I typed a message. I needed to sound like him, panicked, urgent, and selfish. "Police are coming," I typed, my thumbs moving with lethal precision. "They suspect poison. They are coming to the house with a warrant right now to search for the bottle. You have to get there before they do. Use the spare key in the planter. Get the vial from the bathroom cabinet and flush it. Go, now. Do not reply." I hit send. The message bubble turned blue. Delivered. I watched the screen. 3 dots appeared, dancing for a second, then disappeared. Valerie was reading it. She was panicking. She was reacting exactly as a guilty accomplice would. I deleted the message from the sent folder immediately. I did not want the police to see that Jason had warned her. I wanted it to look like she was acting on her own paranoia. Cleaning up a crime scene she helped create. I dropped the phone back into my purse and headed for the exit. I had told the doctors I needed to go home to change my clothes and pick up some toiletries. It was a valid excuse for a distraught wife. I hailed a taxi outside the hospital entrance. 450 North Lake Shore Drive. I told the driver, "And please, hurry." The ride took 15 minutes. I spent every second of it calculating the timeline. Valerie worked at a private hospital in Lincoln Park. Depending on traffic, it would take her at least 20 minutes to get to the penthouse. I had a 5-minute head start. When I arrived at the building, I bypassed the doorman with a distracted wave, holding a tissue to my face to maintain the facade of the grieving wife. I took the private elevator up to the 40th floor. The penthouse was silent, the scene of the crime. The 2 glasses still sat on the coffee table, the green liquid now flat and separated. The police had not yet arrived to process the scene because the investigation had started at the hospital as a medical emergency. Detective Miller was likely just now dispatching a team to secure the residence based on Jason's confession. I had a very narrow window. I ran to the master bathroom, under the sink, tucked behind a stack of cleaning supplies. I found what I was looking for. It was a small, amber glass vial. The label had been peeled off, but it still smelled faintly of chemicals. This was the trash Jason had been too lazy to take out. He had thrown it in the wastebasket, assuming I would never look there. I took the vial. I wiped my fingerprints off it with the hem of my dress. Then, I placed it on the vanity counter, right in plain sight. I grabbed a bottle of high-end perfume from the shelf, a gift Jason had given me last Christmas, likely bought by his assistant, and smashed it on the floor. The glass shattered, and the strong scent filled the room, masking any lingering odor of the aconitine. It made the room look chaotic, like someone had been searching frantically. I placed the amber vial in the center of the mess. It was the bait. I checked my watch. Valerie would be here in 10 minutes. I left the apartment, locking the door behind me. I took the elevator down to the lobby, then walked out the back service entrance to avoid the doorman seeing me leave so soon. I walked 2 blocks away, finding a quiet spot near a park bench. I pulled out a burner phone I had purchased months ago for security research at work. I dialed 911. "Emergency," the operator answered. "I need to report a burglary in progress," I whispered, pitching my voice to sound like a terrified neighbor. "I am at the Lakeshore Penthouse residences. I saw a woman breaking into the top floor unit. She looks frantic. I think she has a weapon." "We have officers in the area," the operator said. "What is the address again?" I gave them the address. "Please hurry," I said. "She is destroying the place." I hung up and destroyed the SIM card, dropping the pieces into a sewer grate. Then, I opened the security app on my main phone. I had installed hidden cameras in the living room and hallway years ago. Unbeknownst to Jason, it was a precaution for when we traveled. But today, it was my front row seat to the show. I watched the live feed on my screen. 7 minutes later, the front door of the penthouse opened. Valerie walked in. She looked exactly as I remembered her, blonde, petite, but currently looking like a wreck. She was wearing scrubs, a coat thrown hastily over them. Her eyes were wild. She did not call out. She ran straight for the hallway, heading for the bathroom Jason had mentioned in my text. I switched the camera view to the hallway feed. I saw her rush into the master bath. She saw the broken perfume bottle. She saw the amber vial sitting amidst the shards. She lunged for it. She grabbed the vial, clutching it to her chest as if it were a holy relic. She was muttering to herself, looking around wildly. She shoved the vial into her pocket and turned to leave. That was when the elevator doors in the foyer pinged. Valerie frozen. "Police, show me your hands." The voice boomed through the audio feed on my phone. 3 officers, guns drawn, stormed into the living room. Valerie screamed. She tried to run back toward the bedroom, but she slipped on the polished floor. I said, "Show me your hands. Get on the ground now." I watched with a cold, grim satisfaction as Valerie, the woman who had plotted to spend my life insurance money, was tackled to the ground by 2 burly officers. They wrenched her arms behind her back. "I didn't do it," she was screaming, her voice shrill and hysterical. "He told me to come. He told me to get it." "You have the right to remain silent," the officer recited, snapping the handcuffs onto her wrists. They patted her down. The officer pulled the amber vial out of her pocket. He held it up to the light. "Looks like we found the evidence," he said to his partner. I closed the app. The trap had snapped shut. The mouse was caught. I waited another 10 minutes, giving them enough time to drag her to the squad car. Then, my phone rang. It was Jason's phone. I stared at the screen. The caller ID said V. She was using her one phone call. Or perhaps she had managed to dial from the back of the squad car before they took her phone away. She was calling her lover, her savior, the man who had promised her everything. I let it ring twice. Then, I swiped green. "Jason!" Valerie's voice exploded through the speaker, sobbing, hyperventilating. "Jason, help me. It was a trap. The police were there. They found the vial. You have to tell them. You have to tell them I was just cleaning up for you." I did not say a word. I just listened, my finger hovering over the record button on my own phone, which I was holding next to Jason's. "Jason, why aren't you saying anything?" she shrieked. "They are charging me with attempted murder. They say I broke in. You told me to go. You sent the text." "Hello, Valerie," I said. Silence. Absolute, terrified silence on the other end of the line. Who is this?" she whispered. "This is Anita," I said. My voice was calm, smooth, the voice of a woman in total control. "Jason cannot come to the phone right now. He is in the ICU. He told the police everything, Valerie. He told them how you gave him the poison. He told them how you manipulated him." "No," she breathed. "That is a lie. He wouldn't." "He did," I lied. "And now, I have you on tape admitting that you went to the house to destroy evidence. They found the vial. You said, 'I was just cleaning up.' That is an admission of guilt. Valerie, conspiracy to commit murder, tampering with a crime scene, burglary." "You bitch," she screamed. "You set me up." "I am the victim here, Valerie," I said coldly. "You are the mistress who tried to kill me, and now you are going to prison for a very, very long time. Do not call this number again." I hung up. I saved the recording. It was perfect. A frantic, guilty plea from the woman caught red-handed. I hailed another taxi. "Police District 18, I told the driver. When I arrived at the station, I put on my best performance yet. I walked up to the front desk, my eyes wide with confusion and fear. "I am Anita Broadwell," I told the desk sergeant. "My husband, Jason Broadwell, is in the hospital. The detectives told me there was a break-in at our home and that they caught the person." Detective Miller appeared from the back offices. He looked tired but triumphant. "Mrs. Broadwell," he said. "Yes, we caught the intruder. You are lucky you weren't home." "Who was it?" I asked, gripping the counter for support. "Was it the loan sharks?" "No," Miller said, watching my reaction closely. "It was a woman. Her name is Valerie Kinsley." I let my jaw drop. I staggered back a step, putting a hand to my chest. "Valerie," I gasped. "No, that is impossible." "You know her?" Miller asked sharply. "Yes, I know her," I exclaimed, my voice rising in disbelief. She is a friend of the family. She is a pharmacist. She and Jason, they have known each other for years. She has been to our house for dinner parties. She is the one who recommended the supplements Jason takes." I looked up at Miller, letting the horror dawn on my face. "Oh my God," I whispered. "Jason said someone gave him the bottle. He said he was tricked. Are you telling me? Are you telling me Valerie tried to kill us?" Miller nodded slowly. "She was caught with an empty vial of aconitine in her pocket. Mrs. Broadwell. She used a spare key to enter your home. It looks like she was trying to dispose of the murder weapon." "Why?" I sobbed. "Why would she do this?" "We suspect she was obsessed with your husband," Miller said. "We found text messages on her phone. She wanted you out of the picture. She was my friend." I wept, burying my face in my hands. I trusted her. "We will need a formal statement," Miller said gently. "But for now, Mrs. Broadwell, you are safe. She is in a holding cell. She isn't getting out." I nodded, wiping my eyes with a trembling hand. "Thank you, Detective," I whispered. "Thank you for saving my life." I followed him into the interrogation room to give my statement. As I walked, I allowed myself a fleeting, invisible smile. Jason was trapped in his hospital bed, forced to lie to save his neck. Valerie was in a concrete cell, framed by her own panic and my careful orchestration. And I was the grieving victim, the betrayed wife, the survivor. The trap had worked perfectly. Now, it was time to close the jaws and let them bleed. If there is one force of nature more destructive than a hurricane, it is my mother-in-law, Margaret Broadwell. She arrived at Northwestern Memorial Hospital at exactly 9 in the morning, less than 12 hours after her son had been admitted. She did not walk. She stormed. She was a woman of 60 who fought the aging process with the ferocity of a cornered badger, armed with aggressive Botox, a tan that was 3 shades past sun-kissed and deep into burnt sienna, and enough gold jewelry to anchor a small yacht. I was sitting in the waiting room, sipping my 4th cup of coffee, when the elevator doors pinged open. I heard her before I saw her. Her voice, a shrill, piercing contralto that had likely shattered crystal in her youth, echoed down the sterile corridor. "Where is he? Where is my baby?" I stood up, smoothing the wrinkles in my dress, the same dress I had worn during the poisoning, now serving as my costume for the grieving wife act. Margaret rounded the corner. She was wearing a leopard print coat that looked like it had been skinned from the animal while it was still angry, and oversized sunglasses that she did not remove despite being indoors. Behind her trailed a beleaguered-looking personal assistant dragging 2 Louis Vuitton suitcases. She spotted me. For a second, the air in the hallway seemed to freeze. Then, she dropped her purse on the floor and marched toward me, her finger pointing like a loaded weapon. "You," she screeched. Heads turned. Nurses at the station stopped typing. A doctor reviewing a chart looked up, startled. "Mom," I said, putting on my most fragile, broken voice, "I am so glad you are here. It has been a nightmare." "Do not call me Mom!" Margaret yelled, stopping inches from my face. I could smell her perfume. It was a cloying mixture of gardenias and old money. "This is your fault, I knew it. I knew you would bring ruin to him." She poked a manicured nail into my chest. It hurt, but I did not flinch. I let my shoulders slump, making myself look smaller, weaker. "Margaret, please," I sobbed quietly, loud enough for the audience of medical staff to hear, but soft enough to seem intimidated. "He was poisoned. Someone tried to hurt him." "Poisoned," she laughed, a harsh barking sound. "He probably ate your cooking, or maybe you drove him to it. Look at you. You look terrible. You cannot even take care of yourself, let alone a husband. I told him 7 years ago. I told him. Jason, she is a jinx. She is a black cloud. She is not one of us." But did he listen? A young nurse, bless her heart, stepped out from behind the desk. She looked indignant. "Ma'am," the nurse said, walking over with brisk authority, "you need to lower your voice. This is a hospital. Mrs. Broadwell has been here all night praying for her husband. She is in shock." Margaret whipped her head around to glare at the nurse. "Do not tell me what to do. You little waitress in scrubs. That is my son in there. My son." She turned back to me, her eyes venomous. "If anything happens to him, Anita, I will sue you for every penny you have. I will make sure you are on the street. You are a curse, a comet of bad luck." I covered my face with my hands, letting out a jagged, theatrical wail. "I am sorry, I am so sorry." The performance was perfect. I could feel the sympathy in the room shifting toward me like a tide. To everyone else, I was the battered, exhausted wife being abused by a monster-in-law from hell. To Margaret, I was a punching bag. But to me, I was simply the director of a play. And she was delivering her lines exactly as I had anticipated. "Can I see him?" Margaret demanded, ignoring my tears. "He is in room 1204, I whispered. "But please, be gentle. He is weak." "I do not need your permission," she snapped. She grabbed her purse and stomped toward the room, her heels clicking like gunshots on the tile. I waited a beat, wiped my eyes, and gave the nurse a grateful, trembling smile. "Thank you," I mouthed. Then, I followed the beast into the lair. Jason was awake. He looked even worse than he had the night before. His skin was gray, and the dark circles under his eyes were profound. When he saw his mother, he didn't look relieved. He looked terrified. "Mom," he croaked. "Oh, my poor baby." Margaret's demeanor flipped instantly. She rushed to the bedside, throwing herself over him in a display of maternal anguish that would have been touching if I didn't know she was likely calculating how this affected her allowance. "Look what they did to you. Look at you." She began fussing with his sheets, smoothing his hair, and glaring at the IV drip as if it were personally offending her. "I need to use the restroom," I announced softly. "I will give you two some privacy." Margaret didn't even look at me. "Go, and take your bad energy with you." I walked to the bedside table to grab my purse. As I did, I accidentally knocked a box of tissues onto the floor. "Clumsy," Margaret hissed. "Sorry," I mumbled. I knelt down to pick up the tissues. In that split second, concealed by the bulk of the bed and the distraction of my own clumsiness, I reached into my sleeve. I slid a small, high-powered digital voice recorder, a device I used for hostile boardroom negotiations, out of my cuff. It was sleek, black, and magnetic. With a practiced flick of my wrist, I stuck it to the metal frame of the bed, right underneath the mattress where Jason's head lay. It was invisible unless you were lying on the floor looking up. I stood up, placed the tissues back on the table, and walked out of the room. "I will be in the cafeteria," I said. I closed the door. I did not go to the cafeteria. I walked down the hall to the waiting area, sat down, and opened a book. I did not read a single word. I simply watched the clock. I gave them 20 minutes. 20 minutes for the reunion. 20 minutes for the truth to come out. I knew Margaret. I knew she wasn't just here to comfort him. She was here to assess the damage to the family asset. When I returned, Margaret was coming out of the room, looking flushed and angry. "I am going to the hotel," she announced, brushing past me without making eye contact. "I need a shower. The air on the plane was filthy. I will be back at dinner. Try not to kill him before then." She marched off toward the elevators. I watched her go, a smirk playing on my lips. "Safe travels, Margaret." I entered the room. Jason was staring at the ceiling, looking like a man who had just gone 12 rounds with a heavyweight champion. He looked drained, hollow. "She is gone," I said, walking to the bed. "Water," he rasped. I poured him a cup of water and held the straw to his lips. He drank greedily. "Did you have a nice chat?" I asked innocently. "She is intense," Jason muttered. "I dropped an earring earlier," I lied. "Let me just check." I knelt down by the bed again. My hand found the cool metal of the recorder. I pulled it free and slipped it into my pocket in one fluid motion. "Found it," I said, standing up. Rest now. Jason, the police might come back later. I went to the small ensuite bathroom in the hospital room and locked the door. I sat on the closed toilet lid and pulled out the recorder. I plugged in my earbuds. My hands were shaking slightly, not from fear, but from anticipation. I pressed play. First, there was the sound of rustling sheets and Margaret's cooing voice. Oh, my poor boy, my handsome boy. Then, the door clicked shut me, leaving. The tone of Margaret's voice changed instantly. It dropped an octave, losing all warmth, becoming sharp and businesslike. You idiot, Margaret hissed. You absolute, incompetent moron. Mom, please, Jason's voice whined. I almost died. And whose fault is that? She snapped. I told you. I gave you the plan 6 months ago. I told you specifically, do not use the heavy stuff. Do not use anything that shows up on a standard toxicology screen. I froze. The breath caught in my throat. 6 months ago. I told you to use the paraquat, Margaret continued, her voice dripping with disdain. Small doses. Put it in her coffee. Make it look like a progressive autoimmune disease. Make her sick slowly. She would have withered away in 3 months, and everyone would have pitied you as the tragic widower. But no, you had to be dramatic. You had to use aconitine wolfsbane. What is this? A Victorian novel. I stared at the tiled wall of the bathroom, my blood turning to ice. Margaret wasn't just a nasty mother-in-law. She was the architect. She was the one who planted the idea of murder in his head. She had advised him on the method. I couldn't wait 3 months. Mom, Jason cried out on the recording. I didn't have the time. Why? Margaret demanded. Is it the gambling again? Did you go back to the tables? Silence. Then, a pathetic sob. I owe the syndicate $2 million, Jason confessed. They gave me a deadline, end of February, if I didn't pay. They said they would break my legs first, then yours. $2 million, Margaret shrieked. You stupid fool, I thought you said it was 200,000. It snowballed, I tried to win it back, and I lost more, and there is something else. What could possibly be worse than owing the mafia $2 million? Valerie, Jason whispered. She is pregnant. My hand flew to my mouth. Pregnant. The mistress. The pharmacist. She told me last week, Jason continued, his voice breaking. She threatened to tell Anita. She threatened to go to the press if I didn't leave Anita and marry her. I needed the money. Mom, I needed the $10 million from the insurance policy to pay off the debt and shut Valerie up. I was going to pay her off and make her get an abortion. Or make her disappear too. I didn't have a choice. There was a long pause on the tape. I could hear Margaret pacing, her heels clicking back and forth. You are a disappointment, Jason, she said finally. Her voice was cold, devoid of any maternal love. You are sloppy. You let your lust and your addiction ruin a perfectly good setup. Anita is a gold mine, and you broke the shovel. Help me, Mom, Jason begged. What do I do? Anita knows something. I can feel it, but she is playing the supportive wife. I pinned it on Valerie like she wanted. But listen to me, Margaret commanded. You stick to that story. Valerie is the villain. Valerie is the stalker. You are the victim. If Anita suspects anything, you deny, deny, deny. And once you get out of here, well, we will have to find another way to deal with her. But for now, you throw that pharmacist slut under the bus. She is pregnant. Good. That gives her a motive to be crazy. Use it. Tell the police she was hormonal and psychotic. But she is carrying your grandchild, Jason mumbled. I do not want a grandchild from a felon. Margaret spat. Destroy her. Jason, it is the only way you survive this. And if you drag me into this, if you tell anyone I knew about the debts or the plan, I will cut you off. You will be on the street. Do you hear me? I hear you, Mom. Good. Now fix your face. You look like a corpse. I am going to the hotel. The recording ended with the sound of the door opening. I sat there in the silence of the bathroom, the earbuds still in my ears. The recording ended, but the echo of their cruelty reverberated in my skull. I had thought Jason was the monster. I thought he was a greedy, cheating husband acting out of desperation. I was wrong. He was just a symptom. The disease was Margaret. She had counseled him to poison me slowly, paraquat, a herbicide that causes pulmonary fibrosis, a slow, agonizing death by suffocation. She had wanted me to suffer for months so her son could play the grieving hero. And the pregnancy? Valerie was pregnant. It added a layer of tragedy to the mistress I hadn't expected, but it also solidified my resolve. Jason was willing to kill the mother of his unborn child to save his own skin. He was willing to frame her, imprison her, destroy her, all to cover his own incompetence. I looked down at the small black device in my hand. It was light, weighing no more than a few ounces, but it was the heaviest thing I had ever held. This was not just leverage. This was a nuclear bomb. I had proof of conspiracy to commit murder. I had proof of the gambling debts. I had proof that Margaret Broadwell was an accessory before the fact. I stood up and looked in the mirror. My reflection was pale, my eyes wide, but there was a fire burning behind them now that hadn't been there before. "You want a war." "Margaret," I whispered to the glass. "You called me a curse. You have no idea." I took the memory card out of the recorder and hid it inside the lining of my bra. I put the recorder back in my purse. I unlocked the bathroom door and stepped back into the hospital room. Jason was dozing, his mouth open, looking pathetic and small. I walked over to him. I smoothed the hair back from his forehead. He stirred and opened one eye. "Is everything okay?" he mumbled. "Everything is perfect, darling," I said, smiling a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Your mother is such a fiercely protective woman. You are lucky to have her." "Yeah," he said, closing his eyes again. "She is great." "Rest now," I whispered. "You are going to need your strength. The show is just getting started." I walked to the window and looked out at the Chicago skyline. The city looked different now. It wasn't just a place where I worked and lived. It was a hunting ground, and I was no longer the prey. I was the apex predator, and I had just cornered the entire pack. The monster mother had arrived, baring her fangs, but she didn't know that I had already pulled her teeth. I pulled out my phone and sent a text to my lawyer, a man I had retained secretly 3 years ago when Jason first started acting shady with the finances. Though I never imagined I would need him for this. "I need to secure a safety deposit box, immediately, and I need a meeting with the district attorney. I have something they will want to hear." I hit send. The trap for Valerie was shut. Now, it was time to build a bigger cage, one large enough for a mother and son to rot in together. The silence of the penthouse, once my sanctuary, had transformed into a fortress under siege. It started 48 hours after Valerie's arrest. I was sitting in my home office, reviewing a merger proposal for a client, when the intercom buzzed. It was the doorman. His voice, usually warm and deferential, was tight with anxiety. "Mrs. Broadwell," he said. "Detective Miller is here again, and he has brought a partner. They are asking to come up." I felt a prickle of unease on the back of my neck. Detective Miller had been sympathetic yesterday. He had seen me as the victim. Why bring a partner now? "Send them up," I said. When I opened the door, the atmosphere had shifted. Miller did not meet my eyes. His partner, a stern woman with a face like carved granite, did the talking. "Mrs. Broadwell," she said, her hand resting near her belt. "We have some follow-up questions regarding your husband's statement. He has clarified some details." "Clarified?" I asked, keeping the door only half open. "Mr. Broadwell is now alleging that he did not drink the cocktail willingly," she said. Her eyes bored into mine. "He claims that you discovered his affair with Miss Kinsley weeks ago. He claims you staged the anniversary dinner as an ambush. He says you forced him to drink the poisoned cocktail under duress, threatening to expose his financial ruin to his investors if he did not comply. He calls it a test of loyalty gone wrong." I stared at her. The audacity of it was breathtaking. It was a desperate, flailing lie. clearly concocted by Margaret. It was the Darvo strategy: deny, attack, and reverse victim and offender. "That is absurd," I said, my voice steady. "He was the one who poured the drinks. He was the one on the phone with his mistress plotting my death. You have Ms. Kinsley in custody." "Ms. Kinsley is claiming she only brought the vial because Mr. Broadwell told her it was for you," the partner countered. "She says she thought it was a sedative, not a lethal poison. She claims she is a victim of his manipulation too. But Mr. Broadwell says you are the mastermind. He says you have been controlling his finances and isolating him from his family for years. He is painting a picture of domestic abuse, Mrs. Broadwell, with you as the abuser." I felt the ground shift, the Black Widow narrative. Margaret had been busy. "Am I under arrest?" I asked coldly. "Not yet," Miller spoke up, finally looking at me. "But you are a person of interest. We advise you not to leave the city." They left, leaving a cloud of suspicion hanging in the foyer. By the next morning, the private war had gone public. Margaret Broadwell had hired a pit bull of a lawyer, a man named Sterling Vance who specialized in high-profile divorces and media circuses. But worse, she had hired a public relations firm. I turned on the television to the morning news. There she was, Margaret, sitting on a beige sofa, dabbing her dry eyes with a lace handkerchief. The headline below her read, "Mother of Poisoned Entrepreneur Speaks Out." "My Jason is a gentle soul," Margaret told the interviewer, her voice trembling with practiced sorrow. "He made mistakes. Yes, he had an affair. I do not condone that. But he was driven to it, that woman, that Anita. She is a monster. She controls every penny he spends. She tracks his phone. She isolated him from me for 7 years. She told him if he ever tried to leave her, she would destroy him." She looked directly into the camera, her eyes hard as flint behind the tears. "She poisoned him," Margaret declared. "She knew about the affair, and she decided if she could not have him, no one would. She is a Black Widow. She is sitting in that penthouse right now, counting her money, while my son lies in a hospital bed fighting for his life." The interviewer nodded sympathetically. "Shocking allegations," he murmured. The fallout was immediate and nuclear. By noon, my email inbox was flooded with hate mail. My social media accounts, which I rarely used, were bombarded with snake emojis and death threats. The hashtag justice. For Jason began trending, fueled by bots and Margaret's paid trolls. Then came the call I had dreaded most. "Anita," said the CEO of Ironclad Solutions. His voice was regretful but firm. "We have seen the news. The board is concerned, given the nature of the allegations, the police investigation. We have to suspend your security clearance. You are on administrative leave, effective immediately, pending the outcome of the investigation." "You know this is a lie." "Robert," I said, gripping the phone, "I am the best analyst you have." "I know," he said, "but we deal in risk, Anita, and right now, you are a reputational risk we cannot afford." The line went dead. I was alone, jobless, vilified, trapped in a glass tower while the world outside sharpened its pitchforks. Reporters were camped out in the lobby downstairs. I could see their satellite vans from my balcony, the same balcony where Jason had planned my murder. They expected me to break. They expected me to hold a press conference, to scream, to deny, to feed the beast. Margaret wanted me to engage. She wanted a mud fight because she knew she had more mud. So, I did the one thing they did not expect. I went silent. I closed the curtains. I turned off the television. I did not post. I did not give statements. I became a ghost. Silence is a vacuum. When you do not fill it with defense, the enemy becomes overconfident. They think you are cowering. They think they have won. And when they think they have won, they get sloppy. I sat in the dark of the penthouse, lit only by the glow of my 3 monitors. If I could not go to the office, I would bring the work here. I was a risk analyst. My job was to follow the data trails that people thought they had erased. I started with Jason's business accounts. I had always respected his privacy regarding his startups, keeping our finances separate aside from the joint savings. That was my mistake. I hacked into his laptop using a brute force decryption program I had written for a security audit years ago. It took 4 hours, but the password cracked. I accessed his cloud storage. I accessed his bank records. What I found was not just a failing business, it was a criminal enterprise. Jason had been running a classic Ponzi scheme. He had taken $2 million from investors for a tech startup called Nebula, but the company did not exist. The office was a P.O. box in the Cayman Islands. He had been using new investor money to pay dividends to early investors, skimming the top for himself. But the skimming wasn't just for gambling. I cross-referenced the withdrawals with his credit card statements. January 14th, a transaction at Cartier, $12,000. February 2nd, a lease payment on a luxury apartment in Lincoln Park, $3,000. February 10th, a wire transfer to a fertility clinic. I felt a cold rage settle in my chest. He wasn't just buying Valerie dinner. He was setting up a second life. He had bought her a bracelet with the money he stole from a retired teacher's pension fund. He was paying for an apartment for her and their unborn child, using the funds he had begged from his college friends. And then, the smoking gun. I found a subfolder labeled Correspondence. Inside were scanned letters from a loan shark syndicate known as the Vipers. The letters were brutal. They detailed the interest rates. They threatened physical violence. But the most damning document was a promissory note signed by Jason just 2 weeks ago. I, Jason Broadwell, pledge the entirety of the Sterling Life Insurance Payout Policy, number 778940, as collateral for the repayment of $2.5 million. Payable upon receipt of funds. He had already promised my death money to the mob. He had signed my death warrant on paper before he even poured the drink. I printed everything, every bank statement, every threat, every receipt for every diamond earring he had draped on his mistress. I had the ammunition. Now, I needed the witness. I looked at the clock. It was 8 in the evening. The reporters downstairs would be tired, looking for coffee. I put on a black wig I had used for a Halloween party years ago. I put on oversized sunglasses and a nondescript trench coat. I slipped out the service entrance, bypassing the doorman by using the freight elevator key I had swiped from the maintenance cart. I walked 3 blocks before hailing a cab. Cook County Jail, I told the driver. Getting in to see Valerie was surprisingly easy. I didn't go as a visitor. I went with my lawyer, whom I had summoned to meet me there. We presented ourselves as potential legal counsel for Ms. Kinsley, who was currently being represented by a public defender who looked like he hadn't slept in a week. Valerie was brought into the meeting room. She looked devastatingly different from the polished professional I had met at Gallus. Her blonde hair was matted. She was wearing an orange jumpsuit that hung loosely on her frame. Her face was swollen from crying. When she saw me, she stopped dead. She grabbed the edge of the table, her knuckles white. "You," she whispered, "you are the devil." "Sit down, Valerie," I said calmly. She looked at the guard, then at my lawyer, then slowly sank into the metal chair. "Why are you here?" she hissed. "To gloat, to record me again." "I am here to save your life," I said. I placed a single file folder on the table between us. "I don't need your help," she spat. Jason will fix this. He said he would. He sent a message through his lawyer. He said I just have to hold on. He said he's going to clear my name once he gets out of the hospital." I laughed. It was a genuine, dark laugh. "Oh, Valerie," I said, shaking my head. "You poor, stupid girl. Jason isn't going to clear your name. He is the one burying you." I opened the folder. I slid a printout across the table. It was the transcript of Jason's latest statement to the police, the one where he claimed Anita forced him to drink, but also the one where he painted Valerie as a deranged stalker who supplied the poison without his knowledge. "Read it," I commanded. Valerie looked down. Her eyes scanned the page. As she read, the color drained from her face until she was translucent. He said I was a stalker," she whispered. "He said I gave him the poison and told him it was vitamins. He is throwing you to the wolves. Valerie, I said. He is listening to his mother. Margaret hates you. She called you a pharmacist slut on a recording I have. She knows you are pregnant, and she wants that baby born in prison so she can take custody and raise it without you. Valerie's hand flew to her stomach. How do you know? I know everything, I said. I know about the apartment. I know about the bracelet. And I know that you are facing 20 years for attempted murder and conspiracy. Jason has Margaret's high-priced lawyers. You have a public defender who smells like gin. Who do you think the jury is going to believe, the rich? Victim husband, or the mistress caught with the poison in her pocket? Valerie began to shake. I didn't mean to kill you, she sobbed. He told me you were abusive. He said you were going to ruin him. He said it was the only way we could be free. I don't care what he told you. I cut her off. I care about what you do now. I leaned forward. I am prepared to post your bail, I said. Valerie's head snapped up. What? I will post your bail. $500,000. I will get you out of this hellhole tonight. Why? She asked, suspicious. Because I need you for free, I said. I need you to testify, not against me, against him. I slid another document across the table. It was an affidavit, drafted by my lawyer. This is a statement, I explained. It details the truth, that Jason planned the murder, that he asked you to procure the aconitine, that he was the one who dosed the drinks, that he coerced you with promises of marriage and financial security. If I sign this, I am admitting to conspiracy, she said, terrified. Yes, I agreed. But you will be a cooperating witness. You will get a plea deal, maybe 2 years, maybe probation if you give them the gambling debts and the insurance fraud. But if you don't sign it, if you stick with Jason, you will go down for attempted murder, alone, and Jason will be laughing all the way to the bank with his mother. I stood up. It is a binary choice. Valerie, we call it a risk assessment. Option A. You trust the man who has already betrayed you twice and lied to the police about you. You give birth in a cell. You lose your child to Margaret. Option B. You trust me. The woman who actually has the money and the evidence to destroy him. You turn state's evidence. You take a short sentence. You keep your baby. I looked at my watch. I have a check for the bail bondsman in my purse. It expires in 1 hour. Decide. Valerie looked at the paper. She looked at her reflection in the interrogation mirror. She looked at the bleak gray walls of her future. She picked up the pen. Her hand was trembling, but her jaw was set. He promised me we would go to Italy, she whispered, a tear falling onto the metal table. He promised me a villa. He promised me loyalty until death, I said. He is a liar. Valerie, sign the paper. She signed. I took the affidavit. I nodded to my lawyer. Get her processed, I said. I want her out tonight, and keep her in a safe house. Margaret will try to get to her. I walked out of the jail into the crisp night air. The wind off Lake Michigan was cold, but I felt burning hot. I had the financial records. I had the mistress turned witness. I had the mother-in-law on tape. The Black Widow narrative was about to collapse. Margaret wanted a media circus fine. I was about to give her the greatest show on earth, but she wasn't the ringmaster, I was, and the lions were hungry. The machinery of destruction was fully assembled. All that remained was to push the button. Valerie was safe in a secure hotel room on the outskirts of the city, guarded by a private security detail I had hired using an offshore account. She had spent the last 12 hours with my lawyer, spilling every sordid detail of Jason's life, the gambling, the fake companies, the specific dates he had met with her to plan my accidental death. Her testimony was the nail in the coffin, but I did not want to just bury Jason legally. I wanted to incinerate him socially, financially, and publicly. The police moved methodically, bound by red tape and procedural caution. The court of public opinion, however, moves at the speed of light and executes without trial. Margaret had weaponized the media against me, painting me as the Black Widow. It was time to show her what a real media strategy looked like. I sat at my desk, the glow of the monitor illuminating the dark room. On the screen was a compressed file labeled simply "The Truth." Inside were the digital audio files. The first was from the hospital room, Margaret's voice dripping with venom as she chastised her son for not using pesticide. The second was the piece de résistance. I had never mentioned it to Jason, nor to the police, but the penthouse security system was not just cameras. When we moved in, I had insisted on installing high-fidelity audio sensors on the terrace. It was a standard feature for high-net-worth properties in Chicago to detect glass breaking or forced entry, but I had tweaked the sensitivity settings years ago. It recorded everything above a whisper. I had retrieved the cloud data from that night. The audio was crystal clear. The wind noise had been filtered out by the algorithm, leaving only Jason's voice, cold and murderous, floating in the digital ether. I did not send this package to Detective Miller. He would just file it into evidence and seal it. Instead, I opened an encrypted email browser. Recipient 1. The Daily Inquiry. They were a ruthless, tabloid-style investigative news channel that thrived on scandal. Their lead anchor, a woman named Diane Storm, was the one who had been running the Justice for Jason segments all week. She cared about ratings, not truth. This would give her the highest ratings of her career. Recipient 2. Sterling Capital Partners. This was the legitimate venture capital firm that Jason had been trying to woo for months. The rival he was terrified of. Sending them the proof of his Ponzi scheme and his debts would ensure he was blacklisted from the business world forever. I hovered my mouse over the send button. "Happy anniversary, Jason," I whispered. Click. The files vanished from my screen, traveling through the fiber optic cables of the city to their destinations. The fuse was lit. 6 hours later, at 7 o'clock in the evening, the world stopped. I sat on the velvet sofa, a glass of real wine in my hand, a vintage Cabernet, not a poisoned cocktail, and turned on the television. Diane Storm was on the screen. Her usual backdrop of the Chicago skyline was replaced by a stark red graphic that read, "Breaking news, the plot twist." "Good evening," Diane said, her face grave, abandoning the sympathetic tone she had used for Margaret just yesterday. "Tonight, we have received exclusive, verified audio recordings that completely upend the narrative of the Broadwell poisoning case. What you are about to hear is disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised." The screen cuts to a black background with a digital audio waveform oscillating in the center. A date and time stamp appeared, anniversary night, 7:14 p.m. Then, Jason's voice filled the room, and millions of living rooms across America. "Do not worry. I put enough aconitine in it. I used the whole vial just to be sure. It is masked by the absinthe. She will not taste a thing." The waveform spiked with his laughter. "Tonight the bitch dies, and the $10 million in life insurance will be ours by morning." I took a sip of wine. Hearing it again gave me a chill, but it was a distant, detached feeling. The broadcast cut back to Diane Storm. She looked genuinely shocked. That was the voice of Jason Broadwell, recorded moments before he collapsed from ingesting the very poison he described. But there is more. We have also obtained a recording from inside Northwestern Memorial Hospital, taken just 2 days ago. The graphics changed. Hospital recovery room. Margaret's voice screeched through the speakers. "I told you to use the paraquat. Small doses. Put it in her coffee. Why did you have to be dramatic? You had to use aconitine. And then, destroy her. Jason, tell the police she was hormonal and psychotic." The silence in the studio after the clip ended was deafening. "There you have it," Diane said, her voice hard. "Not a victim, not a loving husband, but a man plotting to murder his wife for $10 million. Conspired with his mother, Margaret Broadwell. The Black Widow narrative appears to be a complete fabrication designed to frame the true victim, Anita Broadwell." I picked up my phone. Twitter was melting down. The hashtag Justice for Jason had vanished, replaced instantly by hashtag Save Anita and hashtag Monster-in-Law. The comments were a torrent of apologies, rage, and shock. "I can't believe I defended him. He tried to kill her. The mother is evil. Did she say paraquat? That is pure evil. Anita Broadwell is a saint for not killing them herself. The public opinion had not just turned, it had snapped. The mob mentality that Margaret had stoked was now a tsunami rushing back to drown her. At Northwestern Memorial Hospital, the atmosphere in room 1204 had shifted from a sanctuary to a prison cell. Jason was watching television. The remote had fallen from his hand and lay on the floor. His mouth was open, his eyes wide with a terror that transcended physical pain. He watched the waveform of his own voice. He heard the words he had whispered in confidence to Valerie broadcast to the entire world.
"No," he whimpered. "No, no, no, oh."
He grabbed his phone. It was blowing up. Text messages from friends, investors, and business partners were pouring in. "You are a monster. Do not ever contact me again. The deal is off. Lawyers are contacting you." He tried to call his mother. It went straight to voicemail. Then, the news ticker at the bottom of the screen updated. Urgent Chicago police issue arrest warrants for Jason Broadwell and Margaret Broadwell on charges of conspiracy to commit capital murder and insurance fraud. He was done. It was over. The lie had collapsed under the weight of the truth. But then, a new notification popped up on his phone. It wasn't from a friend or the news. It was a text message from an unknown number. It was a picture. The photo was grainy, taken from a car window looking up at the hospital entrance. In the foreground, leaning against a black SUV, was a man. He was large, bald, and wearing a leather jacket. Jason recognized him. It was the butcher, the enforcer for the Vipers. The text below the picture read, "The insurance is void. Jason, the collateral is gone. The boss is very unhappy. We are coming up to collect in blood." Jason's blood ran cold. The police were coming to arrest him. That was bad. But the Vipers were coming to kill him. That was final. If the police got to him first, he would go to prison for life. If the Vipers got to him, he would leave the hospital in several small bags. Panic, primal and overriding, seized him. He ripped the IV tape off his hand. A bloom of blood welled up, but he ignored it. He yanked the needle out. He threw off the covers. His legs were still weak from the residual neurotoxin, trembling violently as he put his weight on them. He stumbled, catching himself on the IV pole. He had to move. He had to get out. He looked around the room wildly. He couldn't leave the front lobby. The police would be there any minute, and the Vipers were watching the main entrance. He grabbed his coat from the chair, the same coat he had worn the night of the party. He shoved his feet into his loafers, not bothering with socks. He opened the door a crack. The hallway was buzzing. Nurses were gathered around a television at the station, whispering and pointing at the screen. They were watching him on the news. He pulled the collar of his coat up and slipped out. He moved away from the nurses' station, heading toward the service elevators at the back of the wing used for laundry and biohazard waste. He pressed the button. His breath came in short, terrified gasps. "Come on. Come on." The elevator clattered open. It smelled of bleach. He threw himself inside and hit the button for the loading dock on the basement level. As the doors closed, he saw 2 uniformed police officers sprinting down the hallway toward his room, guns drawn. Room 1204, clear the hall. The doors slid shut just as they reached the nurses' station. Jason leaned against the metal wall of the elevator, sliding down until he hit the floor. He was sobbing. He was a fugitive. He had no money, no allies, no car, and the entire city was hunting him. The elevator jolted to a halt at the basement. Jason crawled out. The loading dock was cold and drafty. A delivery truck was just pulling out, the ramp lowering. He saw his chance. He ran a lopsided, limping run toward the open bay door. Rain was falling outside. A cold, miserable Chicago rain that soaked him to the bone instantly. He stumbled into the alleyway behind the hospital, slipping on wet pavement. He scrambled behind a dumpster, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He peered out. At the end of the alley, a black sedan was idling. The window rolled down. The bald man, the butcher, was scanning the street. Jason ducked back, He pressed his hand over his mouth to stifle a scream. They were everywhere. The police sirens were wailing in the distance, getting louder, circling the building like a pack of wolves. He was trapped between the law and the lawless. He looked down at his phone. 1% battery remaining. He typed one last message, not to his mother, not to Valerie. He typed it to me. "You win. Please, call them off." The phone died before he could see if I read it. He threw the useless brick into a puddle. He looked at the fire escape of the adjacent building. It was his only way out. Up. He began to climb, the metal rungs slick with rain and grease. He climbed toward the rooftops, into the darkness, a rat scurrying away from the rising water. Back in the penthouse, I watched the live feed from the news helicopter that was now circling the hospital. "Police are sweeping the building," the reporter said, her voice fighting against the sound of the rotors. "But it appears Jason Broadwell is not in his room. A manhunt is underway." I smiled. "Run, Jason," I whispered to the screen. "Run as fast as you can, but you can't outrun the truth." I picked up my phone. I dialed the number for Detective Miller. "Detective," I said, my voice calm and helpful. "I just received a text from my husband. He is scared. I think he might try to go back to where it all started." "Where is that Mrs. Broadwell?" Miller asked with urgency in his voice. "The penthouse," I lied. "He thinks he left his passport in the safe, but he won't come to the front door. He knows the codes for the service entrance on the roof." "We are sending units to your location now. Lock your doors." "I will," I said. I hung up. I knew he wasn't coming here. He was too terrified of me to come here. But I wanted the police surrounding the building. I wanted the perimeter secure. Because when Jason realized he had nowhere to go, there was only one place left for a rat to hide. The sewers or the grave. I walked to the balcony, the same balcony where he had stood so triumphantly just a few days ago. The wind was howling. I looked down at the city. Somewhere down there, in the wet, dark alleys, my husband was shivering, hunted, and alone. He had bet $10 million on my death. He had lost, and the house always collects. The storm outside was not just weather. It was a manifestation of the chaos I had unleashed. Rain lashed against the 40-foot glass walls of the penthouse with the force of gravel being thrown by an angry giant. Thunder rattled the expensive artwork on the walls, shaking the frames as if the building itself were shivering in fear. I was in the master bedroom, illuminated only by the flashes of lightning that tore through the sky. I was not hiding. I was packing. I moved with the efficient, unsentimental precision of a woman dismantling a life she had outgrown. Into a sleek black suitcase went my essentials, my passport, the hard drive containing the evidence against Margaret and Jason, a change of clothes, and the Glock 19 pistol I had purchased 3 years ago after a security briefing at Ironclad Solutions. I checked the magazine. It was full. I zipped the suitcase shut and set it by the door. I was leaving, not because I was afraid, but because this stage was too small for the next act of my life. The police were swarming the streets below, setting up a perimeter, hunting for a man they believed was cowering in a sewer. But I knew Jason. I knew the specific, petty nature of his narcissism. He would not run into the dark to die like a rat. He would come back to the source of his pain. He would come back to destroy the mirror that showed him his true face. He would come for me. Suddenly, the silence of the apartment was severed by a sound that made my blood run cold, even though I had expected it. Crash. It was the sound of tempered glass shattering, massive, heavy sheets of crystal exploding inward. It came from the living room, the balcony doors. My security app on the phone on the nightstand screamed a red alert. Perimeter breach, Zone 1, Terrace. He was here. He had climbed the fire escape, scaled the wet, slippery architecture of the building like a spider fueled by pure venom, and broken into the sanctuary. I did not scream. I did not freeze. The risk analyst in me died the moment that glass broke, replaced instantly by the survivor. I grabbed the pistol, but I did not chamber a round yet. I needed to control the environment first. This was my territory. He was the invader. I slipped out of the bedroom, my bare feet silent on the hardwood floors. I moved to the utility closet in the hallway. I opened the panel box. "Let there be darkness," I whispered. I yanked the master breaker down. The penthouse plunged into absolute, suffocating blackness. The ambient light from the city below was choked off by the storm clouds, leaving the apartment a cavern of shadows. The only illumination came from the strobe light flashes of lightning that intermittently turned the furniture into ghostly silhouettes. "Anita!" The scream tore through the apartment. It was raw, guttural, and terrifying. It did not sound human. It sounded like a wounded animal in its death throes. "I know you are here," Jason shrieked. "I know you are watching me. You ruined everything. You took my life. You took my money. You took my mother." I pressed my back against the wall of the hallway, breathing rhythmically. In, 2, 3, out, 2, 3. I heard him stumbling through the living room. He was crashing into furniture. He was disoriented. The poison was still in his system, making his limbs heavy and his coordination sloppy. But the adrenaline of rage was a potent antidote. "Come out," he roared. "Come out and face me, you coward." I heard the swish-thwack of a blade cutting through the air, then the ripping sound of fabric. He was slashing the sofa. He was armed. I moved. I did not retreat to the bedroom where I could be cornered. I moved into the open space of the dining area, keeping the long mahogany table between us. I knew every inch of this floor. I knew that the third floorboard near the kitchen creaked. I knew the rug in the foyer slipped if you stepped on the corner. Jason, however, was stumbling blind. "Where are you?" he hissed. His voice was closer now. A flash of lightning illuminated the room for a split second. I saw him. He was standing in the center of the living room, 10 feet away. He looked like a nightmare. His hospital gown was torn and soaked with rain and grime. His coat hung off him in tatters. His face was a mask of blood and bruises from his escape, his eyes wide and glowing with madness. In his right hand, he gripped a large, serrated chef's knife won from our own kitchen block. Darkness swallowed him again. "I am right here, Jason," I said. My voice was calm, projecting from the shadows near the kitchen. He spun around, lashing out with the knife. "You bitch! You planned this. You planned it all." "I only finished what you started," I replied, moving silently to the left as he charged toward my voice. He slammed into the dining chairs, sending them clattering to the floor. He screamed in frustration. "I am going to carve you up," he yelled. "I am going to cut that smile off your face." I reached into the pocket of my cardigan. I pulled out a small canister, pepper spray, tactical grade. I waited. I listened to his heavy, ragged breathing. He was wheezing. The aconitine had damaged his heart. He couldn't keep this level of exertion up for long. He was coming closer. I could smell him, the metallic scent of rain, the sour stench of fear sweat, and the chemical smell of the hospital. "Jason," I said softly. He lunged. "Die." I sidestepped with the grace of a matador. I felt the wind of the knife blade slice past my ear. It was close, too close. As he stumbled past me, momentum carrying him forward into the void, I raised the canister and sprayed a 2-second burst directly into the darkness where his face should be. The scream was immediate and agonizing. He dropped the knife. No, he didn't drop it. He flailed, clutching his eyes, but he kept his grip on the handle. "My eyes, you witch, my eyes." He began swinging the knife wildly in blind arcs, a human blender of steel. I backed away. I needed to hear him. I needed to get him to the kill box. "It burns, doesn't it?" I taunted him, moving toward the broken terrace doors. "Like the poison burned your insides. Does it feel like justice?" "Jason." He was tracking my voice. Good. I stepped over the threshold of the broken glass, out onto the balcony. The storm hit me instantly. The wind nearly knocked me over. Rain soaked me in seconds. Plastering my hair to my face, we were 40 stories up, exposed to the elements. "Come and get me. Jason," I shouted over the roar of the thunder. "I am right here where it all began." He stumbled out of the living room, crunching over the broken glass with his bare feet. He didn't seem to feel the pain. He stepped onto the terrace. Lightning flashed again, long and jagged. He saw me. I was backed up against the railing. The city of Chicago spread out below me like a grid of electric jewels. "Found you," he rasped. His eyes were red and swollen shut, streaming tears, but he could see my silhouette against the city lights. He raised the knife. He charged. This was the moment. I did not shoot him, not yet. I dropped to the ground, sweeping my leg in a hard, low arc, a maneuver I had drilled for months in self-defense classes. My shin connected with his ankles. Jason, already off balance and slippery from the rain, lost his footing. His legs flew out from under him. He crashed face first onto the wet concrete of the balcony. The knife skittered away, sliding toward the edge. I scrambled up, putting distance between us. I kicked the knife. It spun across the wet stone and vanished over the edge, falling 40 stories to the street below. "It is over. Jason," I yelled. "Stay down." But he was not done. He was fueled by a demon that defied physics. He scrambled onto his hands and knees, spitting blood and rainwater. He looked at me, and then he looked at the railing. He realized he couldn't kill me with the knife, so he decided to use gravity. He launched himself at me, tackling me around the waist. We hit the railing hard. The metal dug into my spine. The air was knocked out of my lungs. Jason was heavy, dead weight, and he was pushing. He was trying to lever me over the edge. "We go together," he screamed into my face, his breath foul. "If I go to hell, you are coming with me." I clawed at his face. I dug my thumbs into his eye sockets. I kneed him in the groin, but he was numb to pain. He was just a mass of force pushing me back into the abyss. I could feel my feet leaving the ground. I could see the streetlights swirling below. "Let go," I screamed. My hand scrabbled for the waistband of my pants. The gun. I had tucked it there when I fell. My fingers found the cold steel grip. I pulled it out. "Let me go." I brought the butt of the gun down hard on his temple. Crack. He grunted, his grip loosening for a fraction of a second. I used that moment to shove him with every ounce of strength I possessed. I pushed him off me. He stumbled back, reeling. He hit the opposite wall of the terrace, sliding down to a sitting position. He looked at me, dazed, blood pouring from his temple. I stood there, heaving, the gun aimed at the center of his chest. The rain washed the blood off my hands. "Stay down," I commanded. "Do not move." Suddenly, the apartment behind us flooded with light, not the lights of the penthouse, but the harsh, tactical beams of flashlights. Police dropped the weapon. The shouting came from the living room. They had breached the front door. The silent alarm I had triggered when I cut the power had finally brought the cavalry. "He is on the balcony," I shouted without turning my head, keeping my eyes locked on Jason. "He is unarmed, but he is dangerous." 3 officers burst onto the terrace, their weapons drawn. The red dots of their laser sights danced on Jason's chest. "Jason Broadwell," one officer yelled. "Show me your hands. Put your hands on your head." Jason looked at the police. Then he looked at me. He smiled, a broken, bloody, jagged smile. "No," he whispered. He did not surrender. He did not put his hands on his head. He reached into his coat pocket. "He has a gun," an officer screamed. Jason didn't have a gun. I knew that. He had a piece of glass, a shard from the door he had broken. It was long and sharp, like a dagger. He didn't aim it at the police. He looked at me with eyes full of pure hate. "You never win, Anita," he snarled. He lunged, not at the police, at me. He launched himself from the ground with a final, desperate burst of energy. The glass shard aimed directly at my throat. Time seemed to freeze. I saw the jagged edge of the glass catching the light. I saw the madness in his eyes. I squeezed the trigger of my Glock at the exact same moment the police opened fire. Bang! The sound was deafening, louder than the thunder. Jason jerked in midair, as if he had been yanked back by an invisible rope. A bullet I did not know if it was mine or theirs caught him in the right shoulder, spinning him around. He crashed to the ground, inches from my feet. The glass shards skittered harmlessly across the wet concrete. He groaned, clutching his shoulder. Blood, dark and thick, began to pool under him, mixing with the rainwater. "Secure him, move." The officers swarmed him. They kicked his legs apart, flipped him onto his stomach, and cuffed his hands behind his back. "Suspect down. Suspect in custody. We need a medic." I lowered my gun. My hands were shaking now. The adrenaline was crashing. An officer approached me, his weapon lowered but ready. "Ma'am, put the gun down. Slowly." I looked at him. I looked at the gun in my hand. I engaged the safety and placed it gently on the outdoor table. "It is my husband," I said, my voice sounding hollow and far away. "He tried to kill me." "It is okay, ma'am," the officer said, holstering his weapon. "You are safe now. We got him." I looked down at Jason. He was pinned to the ground, his face pressed against the wet stone. He was looking at me sideways. The fire in his eyes was gone, extinguished by pain and defeat. He looked like a broken toy. "Why?" he whispered. The word was barely audible over the wind. "Why didn't you just—" I walked over to him. I stood directly over him, looking down from my height, the rain acting as a baptism, washing away the victim I had pretended to be. "Because, Jason," I said, loud enough for him to hear, loud enough for the police to witness, "I am the one who calculates the risks. You were just a bad investment." I turned my back on him. I walked into the apartment, leaving the storm, the blood, and the man I had once loved outside in the cold dark where they belonged. The chase was over. The hunt was done. And I was the last one standing. 3 months. That is how long it takes for the wheels of justice to grind a man into dust, provided you are the one greasing the gears. The Cook County Courthouse was a fortress of gray stone and grim history, but on this particular morning, it felt more like a gladiator arena. The air outside was electric, vibrating with the noise of news helicopters hovering overhead, and the roar of the crowd gathered behind the police barricades. They were chanting my name. I stepped out of the black armored SUV, and the world exploded into flashes of white light. I had chosen my wardrobe with the precision of a surgeon selecting a scalpel. I was not wearing black. I was not the grieving widow in mourning weeds. I was wearing a bespoke white suit, tailored to perfection, sharp and pristine. It was a statement. I was not a victim stained by darkness. I was the light that had exposed it. I was the cleansing fire. I walked up the courthouse steps with my head high, flanked by my legal team. I did not smile at the cameras. I offered them only the cool, impenetrable mask of a woman who had already won the war and was simply here to collect the spoils. Inside, courtroom 3 was packed to capacity. The air was thick with the scent of floor wax, old wood, and human sweat. Every seat was filled. Reporters, legal analysts, and thrill-seekers jostled for a view. I took my seat in the front row, directly behind the prosecutor. Then they brought him in. Jason Broadwell shuffled into the room. He was a ghost of the man who had stood on my balcony and toasted to my death. He wore an orange jumpsuit that hung loosely on his frame, which had withered significantly during his time in solitary confinement. His right arm, the one shattered by the police bullet, was encased in a heavy medical brace. Strapped to his chest, the nerve damage was permanent. He would never raise a glass with that hand again. He refused to look at me. He stared at the table, his shoulders hunched, defeated. Next to him sat Margaret. She looked even worse. The Botox had worn off, revealing the deep, bitter lines of her face. Her hair, usually dyed a fierce blonde, was showing gray roots. She glared at me with eyes that burned with hatred so pure it felt almost physical. "All rise," the bailiff bellowed. The Honorable Judge Keller took the bench. He was a stern man with no patience for theatrics, which was unfortunate for the defense, because theatrics were all they had left. The trial had been a massacre. First came Valerie. She had taken the plea deal I engineered. In exchange for a reduced sentence of 2 years in a minimum security facility, she had agreed to testify against the Broadwells. She sat on the stand, looking small and broken. She detailed every meeting, every text message, every promise Jason had made. He told me he hated her, Valerie whispered into the microphone, her voice trembling. He told me she was the only obstacle to our happiness. He said the money, the $10 million, was the only way to pay off his debts and start over. And who came up with the idea for the poison? The prosecutor asked. His mother, Valerie said, pointing a shaking finger at the defense table. Margaret, she told him to use paraquat first, when he refused because it was too slow. She told him to blame me if he got caught. She called me disposable. Margaret slammed her hand on the table. Liar, you trashy little liar. Order, Judge Keller shouted, banging his gavel. Mrs. Broadwell, one more outburst and you will be removed. Margaret sat down, seething, her chest heaving. But the real blow came when my lawyer, acting as a special consultant to the prosecution, introduced the financial evidence. I watched Jason's face as the projection screen descended. He looked up, and for the first time, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. He thought this trial was only about the attempted murder. He thought he was facing 20 years, maybe eligible for parole in 10. He was wrong. Your Honor, the prosecutor began, holding up the thick binder of documents I had recovered from Jason's laptop. While the charge of conspiracy to commit capital murder is heinous, we submit that it was merely the climax of a career built on fraud. The defendant, Jason Broadwell, did not just try to steal his wife's life, he stole from everyone. The screen lit up with spreadsheets. This is the ledger for Nebula Tech, the prosecutor explained, his voice ringing out clearly in the silent room. A company that does not exist. Mr. Broadwell solicited over $2 million from private investors, claiming to develop security software. Instead, the funds were funneled into offshore accounts, used to pay gambling debts to a criminal syndicate known as the Vipers, and to finance a luxury lifestyle for his mistress. The jury looked at the screen. They saw the transfers. They saw the Cartier bracelet receipt. They saw the lease for the apartment. This is a Ponzi scheme, plain and simple, the prosecutor declared. He defrauded teachers, retirees, and his own friends, and when the walls started closing in, when the debts became due, he decided to liquidate his most valuable asset, his wife. Jason sank lower in his chair. He looked small. He looked like a child caught stealing from the cookie jar, except the jar was full of blood and other people's life savings. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. When they returned, the foreman stood up. He did not look at the defendants. In the matter of the people versus Jason Broadwell and Margaret Broadwell, we find the defendants guilty on all counts. The courtroom erupted. Judge Keller hammered his gavel until silence was restored. Margaret Broadwell, the judge said, looking down his nose at the woman who had engineered my destruction, for the charge of conspiracy to commit murder and accessory before the fact. I sentence you to 15 years in a federal penitentiary. Margaret screamed. It was a high, piercing sound that made the skin crawl. No, I am an old woman. You cannot do this. She lunged toward me, her manicured claws hooking into the air. You did this, you witch. You ruined my family. 2 bailiffs grabbed her by the arms. She kicked and spat, cursing me with every foul name in the book as they dragged her backward toward the holding cell door. I watched her go. I did not blink. I did not flinch. I simply smoothed the lapel of my white suit. Goodbye, monster. Enjoy the cage. Then, the judge turned his eyes to Jason. Jason Broadwell, Judge Keller said. His voice dropped an octave, becoming heavy with judgment. You betrayed the sacred vows of marriage. You plotted to kill the woman who supported you. You defrauded innocent people of their livelihoods. You are a predator of the worst kind. The judge shuffled his papers. For the charge of attempted first-degree murder, I sentence you to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Jason closed his eyes. A single tear leaked out. However, the judge continued, given the severity of your financial crimes and the sheer number of victims you defrauded to fund your lifestyle, I am adding a consecutive sentence. The judge looked directly at Jason. For 30 counts of wire fraud, securities fraud, and money laundering. I sentence you to an additional 150 years. The gallery gasped. 150 years. It was symbolic. Of course, he would die in prison long before that clock ran out. But it was a statement. It was a declaration that he was never, ever seeing the sun as a free man again. Furthermore, the judge added, all remaining assets, including the contents of your offshore accounts which have been seized, and any future earnings, are to be liquidated and paid as restitution to the victim, Anita Broadwell. It was done. The bailiffs moved in to take Jason away. He stood up, unsteady on his feet. He looked dazed. As they led him past the railing where I sat, he stopped. The bailiff tugged on his good arm, but Jason resisted for a second. He turned his head. We locked eyes. His eyes were hollow, dead things. There was no anger left in them, only a vast, bottomless regret. I stood up. I walked to the railing. I was close enough to smell the stale prison soap on his skin. I leaned in. The cameras clicked furiously, capturing the moment the victim confronted her tormentor, but they could not hear what I said. You made a bet, Jason, I whispered, my voice soft and intimate, like a lover's caress. You bet my life against $10 million. You thought the odds were in your favor. I smiled, and it was the coldest smile I had ever worn. You lost the bet. Now you have lost your life, your freedom, your mother, and your dignity, and me, I have my career, I have my freedom, and now, thanks to your restitution, I have your money too. Jason flinched as if I had slapped him. He opened his mouth to speak, perhaps to beg, perhaps to curse, but no sound came out. Move it, the bailiff grunted, shoving him forward. Jason stumbled away. He did not look back. He vanished through the heavy oak door, into the darkness of the system that would swallow him whole. I turned around. I faced the courtroom. I faced the cameras. I took a deep breath. The air tasted sweet. It tasted like victory. I walked down the center aisle. The sea of people parted for me. I stepped out of the courthouse doors and into the afternoon sun. The reporters surged forward, shouting questions. Anita. How do you feel? Anita. Do you have a statement? Anita. What will you do now? I stopped at the top of the stairs. I put on my sunglasses. Justice was served, I said simply. I walked down the stairs to the waiting limousine. The driver opened the door for me. I slid into the cool, leather interior. As the car pulled away from the curb, leaving the chaos behind, my phone buzzed in my purse. I pulled it out. It was a notification from my literary agent. Subject royalty payment. The Emerald Betrayal message. The first installment of your advance for the memoir has been deposited. Amount $2 million. I looked at the number. It was a nice number, not 10 million, but the book was already a bestseller, and the movie rights were in a bidding war. I would make far more than 10 million by the time I was done telling this story. I leaned back in the seat, watching the city of Chicago roll by outside the tinted window. The storm was over. The clouds had broken. The sky was a brilliant, piercing blue. I had walked through the fire, and I had not burned. I had turned the poison into gold. Jason was right about one thing that night on the balcony. It was an anniversary I would never forget. I smiled, closing my eyes, and let the car carry me forward into a future that was entirely, beautifully mine. Thank you so much for listening to this story of betrayal and justice. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please leave a comment down below, sharing your location and your thoughts on Anita's revenge. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to subscribe to the channel Scarlet Revenge Stories. Hit that like button and smash the hype button to help this story get recommended to even more people.